I was in my university lab, carefully working on a plant growth experiment. I loved this kind of work, mixing soil, adjusting instruments, watching life grow under my hands. My girlfriend Su Yao had just left for her dorm, and I was alone with my thoughts and my plants. Then something strange happened. The jade pendant I had worn since birth suddenly grew hot against my neck. Before I could react, it exploded with blinding light that swallowed the entire room. I reached out instinctively, but there was nothing to grab. The light pulled me in, and everything went dark. I woke up to pain. Terrible, bone-deep cold. My head felt like hot needles were stabbing through it. The smell hit me next, rot, mold, old and thick in the air. I was lying on wet straw inside a small, dark shed. Tools and firewood were piled around me. Then the memories came. Not mine, someone else's. They crashed into my mind like a flood. This body belonged to a boy also named Wang Feng. An orphan, small and weak. He lived with cruel distant relatives who treated him like an animal. Yesterday he had stolen half a stale bun because he was starving. They beat him for it, threw him in this shed, and left him to die. He did die, and somehow I took his place. I had crossed into another world, and I had started at rock bottom. My stomach burned with hunger. My throat was cracked and dry. My body was so weak I could barely move a finger. Death felt very close. I forced myself to think clearly. My biggest threats were cold, thirst, hunger, and infected wounds. I needed water, food, and warmth, in that order. Then I heard voices outside the door. A sharp woman's voice, full of cruelty. Is that little rat dead yet? Good if he is. Drag him to the back mountain and let the wolves have him. Don't let him rot in there. A man's gruff voice answered, and heavy footsteps came closer. My whole body went stiff with fear. The door creaked open. A hunched man peered in, muttered that I looked dead, and decided to wait until it was darker before moving the body. The door slammed shut. I gasped and shook, soaked in cold sweat. Death had been just one door away. But one thought burned through everything else. I am going to survive. And at that exact moment, something appeared deep in my mind. A mysterious space I had never seen before. A mysterious space had appeared in my mind. Despite my pounding headache, I carefully reached out with my thoughts to touch it. It was small and empty. At its center sat a dry, shallow well with nothing but a thin layer of gray mud at the bottom. The ground around it was cracked and lifeless. The whole place felt dead and drained. But I noticed something strange. Time seemed to move slightly slower inside it. Was this my golden finger? My special power? I had my own private space, but I had nothing to put in it. Not even a piece of stale bread. Still, it felt real. It felt like mine, and no one else could see it. My body was getting worse fast. My fever was burning me up from the inside. My lips were cracked and dry. My vision was blurring. I was losing consciousness. I crawled toward the broken clay pot in the corner. There was a tiny bit of dirty, muddy water at the bottom, barely one sip. I wasn't even sure if drinking it would make things worse. Then a crazy idea hit me. I stared at that muddy water and focused everything I had. I pushed with my mind and tried to move that water into the well inside my space. Sharp pain exploded in my head. A wave of dizziness hit me so hard it felt like my life force was being ripped away. But it worked. Inside my space, a small puddle of water appeared at the bottom of the dry well. I held on and watched. Because time moved slower in that space, the dirty water began to clear. Right before my eyes, it turned clean. With the last of my strength, I moved the clean water back out and into my mouth. The burning in my throat eased. Just a little, but enough. This strange space had just saved my life, at least for now. Outside, the sky had turned a dull gray. The cold wind was still howling. That one sip of water was already fading, and hunger and weakness were crushing me all over again. I had a tiny bit of hope for water. But what about food? What about warmth? When night came, they would come for my body. I can't die here. I won't die here. I have to find a way out. Then, from somewhere in the distant mountains, a long, sharp wolf howl cut through the cold air. Raw and hungry and deadly. And before that sound even faded, heavy footsteps began again outside the broken door. Thud, thud, thud. Getting closer. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. My heart was hammering so hard I thought my ribs would break. My throat was completely dry. Death felt like it was already in the room with me. But something cold and sharp cut through the panic. Pure survival instinct taking over. The door slammed open. Cold wind and snow dust poured in. A tall, hunched figure filled the doorway. The smell hit me first, cheap alcohol and sweat. It was Wang Feng, drunk and stumbling, muttering curses about the cold. That was my chance. I had already quietly loosened a bundle of firewood beside me. Now I shoved it hard toward the door. The wood crashed and scattered across the floor. Wang Feng swore and threw his arms up to protect his head. I moved. My body had almost nothing left, but I pushed past every limit. Hugging the shadows along the wall, I crawled on all fours and slipped right past his muddy boots and squeezed through a broken hole in the back wall. I tumbled out like a bag of rags. The cold outside hit me like needles stabbing my skin everywhere at once. My lungs burned with every breath. My vision went dark for a moment, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I crawled into a patch of dry, dead bushes behind the house and collapsed there, curled up tight, gasping silently. Every breath pulled at my wounds. When I finally lifted my head, I saw the barren hillside stretching out before me. Dead grass bent in the wind. Jagged rocks sat frozen in the gray earth. Further away, dark forest covered the mountains like a waiting mouth. The cold out here was even worse than inside the shed. I forced my mind to work. Water, warmth, food. In that order. I dragged myself behind a large rock that blocked some of the wind. Then I scanned everything around me carefully. Dead grass, bare thorny bushes, and on the shaded side of some rocks, patches of dark green moss with tiny ice crystals on top. I dug through the original Wang Feng's scattered memories and mixed them with what I knew about plants from my past life. Dandelion roots, bitter, but filling, good for fever. Moss, has some water and minerals, tastes awful. Some plants, poisonous, don't touch. Water was still the most urgent need. The little I had in my space was almost nothing. I decided I had to reach the mountains. That was where any real chance of survival lay. I pushed myself up and moved toward the dark treeline. Inside my mind, I checked the space. The muddy water I had moved into the well earlier had been slowly changing in that strange slow-time environment. Most of the dirt had sunk to the bottom. Above it, a thin layer of cleaner water had appeared. It still smelled like earth, but it was far better than drinking straight mud. It was barely one small sip. But the cracks in the well walls looked slightly less dry than before, like the space itself had absorbed a little of that water. It was a tiny sign, but I held on to it. Once I reached the mountains, I found a small hiding spot between some rocks and stopped to rest. I sank my mind into the space again. The water inside had cleared. It actually worked. The space could purify water. A tiny flame of hope lit up inside me. But I had to be careful. Using the space drained me badly. In my current state, I could only do it once or twice a day at most. Push any harder, and I might pass out completely. I pulled the clean water out carefully. A few cold drops, tasting of earth and rust, hit my dry mouth. The taste was awful, but that small bit of wetness cut through the burning in my throat like a gift. Then my stomach twisted with a violent, hollow hunger. Water was barely solved. Food and warmth were still killing me. I pushed myself up and started searching the ground nearby, stepping carefully and quietly. I spotted withered dandelions. I used a sharp rock to dig up a few black, shriveled roots from the frozen earth. I scraped off the dirt on my shirt and chewed them. Bitter, rough, hard to swallow. In a crack between rocks, I found a small patch of dark green moss. I pulled off a piece and ate it. It was cold, slimy, and tasted like wet dirt. I nearly gagged but forced it down. Then the best find. On a few bare branches, tiny dried-up little fruits hung in clusters. The memories from this body's original owner surfaced. Village kids called them sour berries. Even birds ignored them. But they weren't poisonous. I picked every single one like they were treasure. Then I noticed something. Tiny grass seeds had stuck to my torn pants from the dead weeds around me. I stared at them sitting in my palm. A wild idea sparked in my burning mind. Despite the dizziness and the pain behind my eyes, I focused and used my mind to place 2 of the fullest seeds into the space, dropping them onto that cracked, lifeless gray soil. Another wave of dizziness hit me. Planting things in the space also used up mental energy. I slumped back against the cold rock and ate the rest. Dandelion roots, bitter and fibrous. Then one of the sour berries. The moment I bit through the dry skin, an explosion of sourness hit my mouth, so hard my whole face scrunched up and my stomach cramped. But I swallowed it. Every bit of it. My thoughts came in slow, broken pieces. Water, purify from rain using the space. Food, this is barely enough to stay alive. Warmth, need fire or a sheltered cave. The seeds, the space moves time faster. That's my only real hope. Night fell without me noticing. The wind turned savage, slashing at my skin like ice blades. Temperature was dropping fast. I curled into a hollow in the rock, piling dead grass over myself like a blanket. I shook violently. My teeth chattered without stopping. The tiny amount of food had given me almost no warmth. My fever seemed to be getting worse, burning inside while my skin was frozen. The cuts on my arms and legs were going numb. I pushed my mind into the space one more time. Nothing had changed. The two seeds sat still on the cracked gray dirt. Not even the smallest sign of life. The slow time inside the space hadn't seemed to do anything for them. Maybe they needed something. Maybe they needed water. Then, from deep in the dark forest, a wolf howled. Long, sharp, and hungry. Then a second. Then a third. All answering each other. Close by, in the bushes just beside me, something rustled through the dead grass and stopped. Something was out there, watching me. I pulled myself into the tightest ball I could, buried my face in my arms, and wrapped the dead grass tighter around me. I trembled from cold and fear and weakness all at once. In the darkness, all I could do was stare into the space inside my mind, at that lifeless gray dirt and those two silent seeds. The cold darkness wrapped around me like a burial cloth. Wind cut through every gap in my rags. Inside I was burning with fever. Outside my skin was ice. My wounds were going numb, with a strange itching feeling underneath that worried me. Wolf howls filled the dark forest around me. Something rustled in the bushes nearby, circling, waiting. I couldn't let myself fall asleep. Sleep meant death. Then I checked my space, and I couldn't believe what I saw. Two tiny green shoots had broken through the cracked gray soil. Pale, thin, and sickly, but alive. The seeds had actually sprouted. In that space where time moved faster, they had gone from dead seeds to living plants. And around their roots, the cracked earth looked ever so slightly less dead. Joy hit me like a wave and washed away the despair for one moment. Then my mind snapped back to work. Foxtail grass. The young leaves were edible. The roots might help with fever and inflammation. My wounds were getting infected. This could matter. I reached into the space with my mind and carefully pulled the tiny sprouts out. The mental drain hit me hard on top of the fever, and my vision went dark for a second. But I had them in my shaking hands. I found a flat rock and used a sharp stone to crush the sprouts. A tiny amount of dark green juice seeped out, almost nothing. I spread some on my burning forehead and temples. A faint coolness touched my skin, barely there, like a single drop of water on hot iron. I swallowed the rest. It tasted bitter and grassy and awful. I nearly gagged, but I kept it down. Then I pressed the crushed plant scraps over the deepest cut on my arm. It stung sharply. I hissed through my teeth. I collapsed back and lay there gasping, completely drained. Slowly I checked how I felt. The fever hadn't broken, but it had stopped climbing. The burning in my throat was slightly less. The deep itching in my wound had quieted a little, replaced by a cleaner, simpler pain. It worked, but just barely. Common weeds weren't enough. They could keep me from dying right this moment, nothing more. I needed real medicinal plants, better seeds, and somehow I needed to improve that dead soil in the space. The desire to get stronger had never felt so urgent and so real. When pale light started showing outside, I forced myself up. The fever was still there, just held back at the edge. My body felt like it was full of lead, but I had to find water and food. The purified water in my space was my last emergency reserve. I couldn't waste it. I moved along the rocky hillside, staying careful and quiet. Then I found what looked like a dried-up stream bed, gray stones, and a few small muddy puddles sitting in the low spots. My eyes lit up. I moved toward the nearest puddle and bent down to look at it. Then, from behind me, a blast of cold, reeking, animal air hit the back of my neck, and every hair on my body stood up at once. Something had locked onto me, something that hunted. I spun around. Two pale green eyes glowed from the shadows between the rocks upstream. A wolf stepped out slowly, thin, with its ribs showing through gray-yellow fur, saliva dripping from its bared teeth. A low growl rumbled in its throat. It was starving, and it had found me. My heart dropped. I had nothing, just a half-rotten stick I had been using as a walking cane. My body was barely holding together. Running would just give it my back. Fighting directly was pointless. I had to think. I crouched low, gripped the stick, and locked eyes with the wolf. I started stepping backward very slowly, scanning everything around me with the corners of my eyes. 1 step, 2, 3, 4. Then I threw the stick hard at a large rock to the wolf's side. It snapped and cracked loudly in the quiet valley. The wolf's head turned toward the sound for just a split second. That was enough. I threw myself toward a dense, thorny thicket nearby, the kind with long, sharp spines covering every branch. Before the wolf could refocus, I dropped to my knees and dug frantically at the soft, sandy ground in front of the thicket. Just a shallow hole, no time for anything deeper. I pressed several sharp flint stones into the bottom of the hole, pointed edges facing up. Then I let myself fall at the edge of the thicket. I curled up, covered my head with my hands, and let out weak, painful groans, making myself look like a helpless, broken thing ready to be taken. The wolf saw me go down. The growl shifted into a short, excited bark. Its legs coiled and launched. It flew through the air straight at my neck. The moment its claws almost touched me, I screamed and rolled with everything I had, deep into the thorns. The spines tore through my clothes and into my skin. It burned everywhere. But the wolf's paws landed perfectly in the hole. The shriek that tore through the valley didn't sound like an animal anymore. The flint had punched straight through its paw pads. It lost all balance and crashed headfirst into the thicket. The thorns did the rest. Every time it thrashed, more spines drove deeper, into its belly, its face, one eye. The more it struggled, the worse it got. Blood soaked through its fur and into the ground. I couldn't wait for it to tire out. A dying animal is the most dangerous kind. I crawled to the stream bed and grabbed a heavy, sharp-edged stone. Then another. I circled around to the side of the thicket and started smashing. I didn't stop. First stone, second stone, third. I kept going until the howling stopped, until the body went still, until those green eyes went dark. Then I dropped onto the cold stones and just sat there, arms too weak to lift, chest heaving like a broken bellows. The smell of blood heavy in the cold air. I had survived. With nothing but my mind and what the mountain had given me, I had killed a wolf. Then the hunger hit me like a wall. I looked at the wolf's body in the thorns. Food, real food, and fur for warmth. My eyes burned with desperate, hungry hope. I couldn't stay near the body. The smell of blood would draw other predators fast. I forced myself up and got to work. Using a sharp piece of flint, I skinned the wolf as best I could. Clumsy work with bad tools, but I managed to get a large piece of back fur. Then I cut away the liver and the thicker meat from the hind legs and spine. Maybe 15 pounds total. I left the rest and moved quickly, wrapping everything up and getting away before something bigger came. I found a sheltered hollow behind a large rock, out of the wind. Using dry grass, dead branches, and 2 rough firestones I had found on the original Wang Feng's body, I managed to get a small fire going. I cut the meat into chunks, skewered them on sharpened sticks, and held them over the flames. The fat dripped and sizzled. The smell of roasting meat hit me so hard my mouth flooded with saliva. When the first piece was done, I bit into it without waiting. Tough, wild tasting, no seasoning at all. But to me in that moment, it was the best thing I had ever eaten. Hot food sliding into my empty stomach felt like life returning. But there was too much meat to eat or carry. It would rot and bring trouble. Then an idea hit me. I grabbed a cooled piece and tried to move it into my space with my mind. It worked. The meat floated quietly in the corner of the space. No smell, no decay. The space preserved it perfectly. I loaded most of the cooked meat in, keeping just a few pieces to eat now. The storage function was confirmed. This changed everything for my survival. With food in my stomach and the faint cooling effect of the grass juice still working, my fever finally began to drop. My skin felt less like burning iron. My head cleared a little. Real, if weak, strength began moving through my body. I wrapped myself in the wolf fur and sat by the fire. For the first time since crossing into this world, I felt something close to alive. Then I checked my arm wound. I peeled away the dried grass poultice and my stomach dropped. The skin around the cut was red, swollen, and there were small yellow-white spots forming. Infected. Getting worse. The weeds had barely slowed it down. Then, from the dark forest around me, wolf howls broke out. Many of them, closer than before, and coming from multiple directions. A wolf pack. The blood and the dead wolf's cries had called them. I moved without thinking. I smothered the fire with dirt, wiped away every trace, stuffed the last few meat pieces under my clothes, grabbed the wolf's skin, and ran. Before leaving, I glanced into my space one last time. The stored meat sat quietly in the corner. The foxtail grass had grown half a foot tall in the accelerated time, but its leaves were still pale yellow and sickly. The soil was the problem, too dead to feed anything properly. The picture became clear in my mind. The space was the foundation of my survival. Faster time for growing, water purification, food storage. But the dead soil was the biggest chain holding everything back. I needed to fix it somehow. Better seeds too, medicinal plants, not just weeds. And I needed to grow my mental energy. It was the key that drove everything in the space, and right now it ran out far too fast. This world was one where the strong consumed the weak. I understood that completely now. I had to get stronger, faster than felt possible. I pulled the wolf's skin tight, crouched low, and moved like a shadow into the deeper, darker mountain forest, away from the howling, away from the glowing green eyes appearing one by one in the darkness behind me. The wolves' cries chased me like war horns tearing through the last dark hour before dawn. I sat with my back against the damp rock wall, every breath pulling at my left arm. When I unwrapped the wound in the thin morning light, my stomach turned. The swelling had grown. The skin around the edges had turned an unhealthy purple. The small infected spots had merged into one weeping patch of yellow-white pus, and the smell was awful. The low fever had come back, making my head spin. This was getting worse fast. If I let it go much longer, I would lose the arm, or my life. I pushed the despair down and dove into my space. There it was. The plant I had moved into the space yesterday, thick leaves edged with faint purple veins, a herb I had recognized as similar to a medicinal plant from my past life. I was calling it seven-leaf grass. It had transformed completely. The drooping leaves were now full and firm, the purple veins deeper and vivid, faintly glowing. In the space's accelerated time, it had not just survived, it had flourished. And around its roots, the cracked dead soil looked ever so slightly more alive, just barely. I pulled the whole plant out carefully. The mental drain hit me hard on top of the fever. My vision flickered. I nearly blacked out. But I had it in my hands. I cut off 2 of the thickest leaves, the ones with the deepest purple veins, and sent the rest of the plant back into the space to keep growing. I couldn't use it all at once. It was too precious. I crushed the 2 leaves on a flat rock. Dark green juice seeped out, thick as honey, with a powerful herbal smell that filled the small space around me. I gritted my teeth and spread the paste directly onto the infected wound. The pain hit instantly, ice and fire at the same time, like a hot brand and cold water together. I gasped and shook, soaked in cold sweat. Then it faded. What replaced it was a deep, spreading coolness that sank into the flesh and bone. I watched the bright purple around the wound edge dim slightly. The throbbing pain dropped by more than half. It was working. It was actually working. But I could feel that the infection was only pushed back, not gone. I would need more of this plant, and my body would need time to fight the rest itself. With the wound suppressed for now, I wrapped myself in the wolf's skin and moved out into the misty morning forest. I had a clear goal: find more seven-leaf grass and collect as many useful seeds as possible. I avoided the Wolf Valley and pushed deeper into the forest, staying close to mossy rocks and leaf-filled gullies, moving carefully, listening for every small sound. Using fragments of the original Wang Feng's memories mixed with my own past life knowledge, I sorted plants into 2 groups as I went: medicinal and edible. For medicine, I found bitter leaf, small serrated edges, strong bitter smell when crushed, mildly toxic, but useful for reducing swelling when applied to skin. For food, I found ground sweet vine, a climbing plant with thick brown roots. I dug a few up. The flesh inside was white and starchy, similar to sweet potato. Whether it was truly safe to eat still needed checking. By a wet stream side, I spotted a low plant with thin pointed leaves and small white flowers, snake-tongue grass, faint bitter smell, known for clearing heat. Then I started collecting seeds. Everything I found: foxtail grass, thistle, unknown shrub seeds, even a few pine nuts dug out from a squirrel's dropped pine cone. I wrapped them all carefully in a piece of clean bark. I climbed up a steep sunny rock face to widen my search. That's when a small dull red spot in a crack in the rock caught the corner of my eye. I was nearly out of the rock crack to search when I spotted that dull red color in the cliff wall. A small shrub, barely half a foot tall, clinging to the bare rock. A few shriveled red berries hung from its branches, dry and wrinkled like forgotten dried fruit. But when I stepped closer, something hit me. A faint, clean coolness that touched not my skin but my mind. My mental exhaustion eased, just slightly. This was completely different from the seven-leaf grass, which healed the body. This reached the spirit. My heart jumped. This was no ordinary plant. I checked all around carefully. No snakes, no birds of prey, no signs of other people. Then I used my mind to carefully pluck 2 of the fullest-looking berries and collected a few of the small brown seeds from the branches. I sent them all into my space, stored separately from everything else, and backed away without taking more. Back at my resting spot, I sorted through everything I had gathered. Seven-leaf grass. I had found a whole small patch of it in a damp mossy hollow, about a dozen plants. I moved most of them into my space to create a small medicinal garden, keeping a few in the ground outside under dead leaves. Other plants, small samples of bitter leaf and snake-tongue grass. A few ground sweet vine roots to test later for eating. Seeds, a bark-wrapped bundle full of mixed grass seeds, shrub seeds, and pine nuts. A decent haul. Then came the space experiment. I pushed through a splitting headache and sent my mind in. The seven-leaf grass garden was thriving. New shoots, full leaves, the purple veins glowing faintly. And around each plant's roots, the dead cracked soil looked fractionally less gray, as if the plants were feeding something back into the earth. The ordinary grass seeds were struggling badly. Pale, yellow, barely alive, fighting against the dead soil. Common plants clearly could not handle this environment. The bitter leaf and snake-tongue seeds sprouted even worse than the weeds. The red berry seeds, nothing. Completely still. As if the accelerated time meant nothing to them. Whatever they needed to sprout, I didn't have it yet. The 2 whole berries floated quietly in the storage corner, their faint coolness sealed inside perfectly. I understood the space better now. It worked wonderfully for special plants like seven-leaf grass. It was nearly useless for common plants. Spiritual plants seemed to need special conditions to sprout. And my mental energy was the biggest limit of all. I dragged myself to the small stream to collect water. It was running lower and more cloudy than before. Something had changed upstream. While scooping water, I noticed something in the wet mud along the bank. Long, thin seeds with small bristles, half buried in the silt. I dug them out carefully. Narrow, full in the middle, with a pale brown shell. They looked like wild rice. My heart hammered. Grain. Real grain. If these could grow, that was stable food. Actual energy, not just survival scraps. I washed all 15 seeds in the stream and cupped them in my palm like treasure. Then I thought of the dying yellow weeds in my space and felt the hope cool slightly. What if these did the same? By evening, my wound had improved greatly. The seven-leaf grass paste had worked. The swelling was mostly gone. The pus had stopped. A dry scab was forming. The fever was completely gone. My body was slowly rebuilding itself on wolf meat and boiled ground sweet vine root, which I had confirmed safe to eat by watching insects feed on it first. But my mental energy was still drained to the bone. Every space operation left me with a dull, grinding headache that recovered far too slowly. I checked the space one last time. The seven-leaf grass glowed with life. Everything else struggled or sat silent. Then I looked at the stream. It was drying up. The wolf meat was almost gone. The space couldn't grow common crops. I needed a better water source, better food, better seeds, and somehow a way to grow my mental power. A thought pushed through all of it, quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. Maybe it was time to leave this forest. Find people. Trade for salt. Get iron tools. Find better seeds. Maybe even find a way to learn cultivation, a real technique for building mental energy. The idea took root and wouldn't stop growing. Then a buzzing sound broke the silence. A swarm of fat black flies had followed the smell of blood and pus to my hideout. They swarmed over my discarded bandage rags. A few came for my healing wound directly. I swatted them away hard, but my eyes went cold as I stared out at the darkening forest. The smell of blood travels far in a quiet mountain. I followed the stream upward, hoping to find cleaner water. The further I went, the denser the forest got. Finally, I spotted a small waterfall and a deep pool beneath it. Then I saw what was in it. A deer carcass, wedged in the rocks at the pool's edge, badly rotted. The water was completely ruined. My stomach heaved. With no clean water available, I decided to try something I hadn't attempted before, pulling water directly from beneath the pool through my space, bypassing the contamination. I sat behind a large rock, closed my eyes, and pushed my mind as hard as I could. The pain was immediate and violent. My temples felt like they were being hammered. My vision went black, then exploded with white spots. Blood ran from my nose. My whole body shook. But something happened. Deep in the space, the dry well began to seep. One drop, then another, then more. And around the well, the cracked gray soil darkened. It softened. It turned deep brown, like rich earth full of life. The cracks closed. The dead ground had come alive. Then I blacked out completely. I don't know how long I was unconscious. Maybe half a day, maybe a full night. When the cold and thirst dragged me back, I forced my mind straight into the space. What I saw made my heart stop. The well had real water in it now, shallow but there, actual water sitting at the bottom. The cracks in the well walls had mostly closed, and the soil around it had transformed completely. Dark, moist, rich, full of life. Growing in that new earth were over a dozen strong, healthy seedlings. The wild grain seeds I had planted earlier. They had shot up nearly a foot tall. Thick leaves, sturdy stems, a deep, lush green. The accelerated time plus the new living soil and well water had done something extraordinary. Beside them, the seven-leaf grass near the well was more vibrant than ever, the purple veins glowing deeper, the medicinal smell richer. The red berries still sat silent in the corner. The ordinary weeds were still dying. Spirit spring, living soil, spirit grain. The words formed in my mind like a revelation. But the reality was cold and clear. The well held only a little water. The living soil covered only a small area. And I had nearly destroyed my mind to make it happen. My mental energy was completely gutted. Even focusing for a moment made my head scream with pain. Everything in the space ran on mental power. That meant finding a cultivation technique, a way to actually train and grow my spiritual energy, was no longer optional. It was urgent. I sat up slowly and chewed bitter dandelion root, trying to recover. Then voices drifted up from the valley below. I flattened myself against the ground instantly and looked through the gap in the bushes. Two men on the mountain trail below, maybe 100 steps away. Patched rough cloth clothing, bamboo bows on their backs, chopping knives at their waists. Hunters from some village. A scrawny dog sniffed along behind them. They had spotted the ruined pool and the deer carcass. The younger one cursed it loudly. The older one, the younger, called him Uncle Jean, told him to save his breath and move on. They were headed somewhere called Eagle Ravine, where someone had spotted deer tracks recently. The young one, Xiao Qi, grumbled about the fur trader back in the village and mentioned something called Black Wind Stronghold raising their protection fees. The older man cut him off sharply, scanning the tree line with wary eyes, and told him to stop talking and move. They left quickly, the dog trotting after them, and disappeared into the trees. I lay still long after they were gone, heart beating steadily. People, a village nearby, a fur trader, a stronghold demanding payment from locals. The outside world was calling, and I was finally strong enough, barely, to think about answering. I stayed flat behind the rock long after the hunters had gone, picking apart everything they had said. Eagle Ravine, a water source, a nearby village, a fur trader named Lu, and Black Wind Stronghold, bandits demanding payments from the locals. The idea of going down to the village had gone from a thought to a fire burning in my chest. Salt, iron tools, better seeds, knowledge about this world, a cultivation technique. All of it was somewhere down that mountain. But I forced myself still until the forest was completely quiet again. Back at my hiding spot, I checked the space and stopped breathing for a moment. The grain was ready. The wild rice seedlings had matured. Their leaves had turned faintly golden, and the seed heads hung heavy and full, each grain round and smooth, glowing with a soft golden light, giving off a clean, sweet smell nothing like ordinary grain. I harvested every stalk carefully with my mind, not letting a single grain fall. The total came to about half a bowl. I ground a small portion between two flat stones, slow, painful work that left my fingers raw. until I had a small pile of tiny white grains, clear as jade. I added them to stream water in my bamboo tube and set it over a small fire. As it cooked, a scent drifted out that I had never smelled before. Clean and sweet and deep, like the forest itself had been distilled into something pure. Just breathing it eased the ache behind my eyes. When it was ready, I took a small sip. The warmth moved down my throat and spread outward through my whole body, slow, gentle, reaching all the way to my fingers and toes. The cold faded. The bone-deep hunger eased. Even the grinding pain from my drained mental energy softened, just slightly. I drank every last drop. This was something far beyond ordinary food. The taste, the warmth, that faint restoring feeling. If I could bring this to the village and trade it. Then I looked at what was left. Barely a handful of grain. A patch of living soil the size of a wash basin. A well with almost no water. The excitement cooled fast. Not enough. Everything was still not enough. But the decision was made. I was going down the mountain. The hunters, the grain, my empty supply of everything. It all pointed the same direction. I moved carefully. Most valuable things went into the space. The wolf skin, the remaining grain wrapped in leaves. I hid a small amount of grain in the lining of my clothes and tucked a few dried 7-leaf grass pieces against my chest. I carved a hardwood walking stick, fire-hardened at the tip. I buried the fire, wiped my traces, rubbed bitter leaf juice around the area to cover my scent. Then I walked. After half a day of careful travel through thinning forest, I climbed a ridge and pushed through the brush. Below me lay a village. Small, old, worn down. Dozens of mud and thatched roof houses scattered across the valley floor. A few thin lines of cooking smoke rising up. Narrow terraced fields behind it, crops sparse and struggling. A dirt road leading away into the distance. A few tiny figures moving between the houses. My heart beat faster. Fear and hunger and hope all at once. I crouched low and studied the layout carefully. The roads in and out, the terrain at the entrance, which buildings looked slightly more substantial than the rest. Then, from just behind me, a warmth. A tiny, faint heat from the grain hidden inside my clothes. Like the faint spirit energy in it was stirring uneasily. Instinct or warning, I didn't stop to decide. I spun around and scanned the trees behind me. In the shadows of a thorny thicket, a pair of eyes stared back. Sharp and greedy, fixed on my bundled pack. A young man in dirty clothes, thin-faced, lips pulled back in a silent grin, crouched low, ready to spring. I entered the village with my head down, face smeared with dirt, wolf skin pulled tight around me. I tried to look like just another starving refugee passing through. The smell of the place hit me immediately. Animal dung, wet mud, cooking smoke. I kept moving through the narrow lanes, eyes scanning for the market the hunters had mentioned. My bundle on my back felt like it had a target painted on it, even though it only held some dried ground vine roots, bitter leaf, and my firestones. Then 3 figures stepped out of a side alley and blocked my path. The one in front I recognized immediately, the same rat-faced young man who had been watching me from the bushes on the mountain. He had scab marks on his head and a crooked grin. 2 others flanked him, one fat, one thin, both staring hungrily at my bundle. He demanded a toll for walking through what he called their lane. I hunched my shoulders, let my voice go weak and frightened, and told them I was a refugee with nothing but a little food. He didn't believe me. He reached for my bundle. I moved first. Instead of pulling back, I grabbed the bundle and hurled it hard at the wall behind him. It burst open. Dried roots, bitter leaves, and firestones clattered across the muddy ground. All 3 of them instinctively turned toward the mess. That half-second was all I needed. I dropped low and bolted sideways, straight into a narrow gap between piles of broken baskets and rotting wood. I had spotted it when I first came through, just wide enough for one person. They chased me, cursing and stumbling over each other in the cramped space. I twisted through collapsed stalls, ducked under broken walls, vaulted over a low fence. My knowledge of how to read terrain kept me ahead of them. As I leapt over a crumbled pigsty wall, the small packet of spirit grain hidden inside my clothes shifted. A thin gap opened in the wrapping. A scent escaped, clean, sweet, pure, nothing like ordinary food. I heard Ratface stop and sniff behind me. His voice carried through the alley, confused and suddenly more interested. That smell was no ordinary grain. He knew it. I didn't stop. I kept running until I had lost all 3 of them completely, then caught my breath and blended into the crowd moving toward the village center. The market was barely a market. A few bamboo poles with worn cloth strung between them for shade. Scattered stalls selling dried animal skins, low-quality mushrooms, common herbs, black-colored rough salt, cracked pottery bowls, and rusted, old farm tools. The villagers browsing were thin and hollow-faced. The atmosphere was heavy and hopeless. Trade was mostly barter, with a few worn copper coins changing hands between the occasional traveling merchant. I moved along the edges carefully, taking it all in. I stopped at a stall with a cracked wooden sign that read Mountain Goods and Medicine. The stall-keeper was a lean, middle-aged man with sharp, triangular eyes and high cheekbones, picking his teeth lazily. His goods were common and mediocre. I pulled out one of my 7-leaf grass plants from inside my clothes, grown in the space, leaves full and firm, the purple veins deep and clear, with a clean, rich herbal smell nothing like the dried-out yellow scraps on his table. I asked quietly if he was buying herbs. His eyes sharpened immediately, though he hit it fast. He took the plant, pretended to examine it without interest, then made a face and offered 2 copper coins. I already knew from fragments of the original Wang Feng's memories that a specimen this good was worth at least 5 or 6. I said no thank you and reached for it back. He called after me. 3 coins. Final offer. I took my herb and walked away without looking back. His annoyed muttering followed me down the lane. I kept moving through the market until a small shop in the far corner caught my eye. The sign above the door was so worn I could barely read it. Chin's General Goods. Inside it was dark and cluttered, packed floor to ceiling with everything from needles and thread to old dusty books. But unlike the chaos outside, this place had a quiet order to it. Behind the counter sat an old man in a faded blue robe, white-haired, thin-faced, mending a broken basket in the dim light. He coughed occasionally, a wet rattling sound. Something about him felt different from everyone else here. Calmer, sharper underneath. I walked in and put my 7-leaf grass on the counter. The old man set down his work and picked it up carefully. He examined the leaves, ran his finger along the purple-veined edge, and brought it close to smell. Then he looked up at me with surprise and genuine appreciation. He said this was an exceptional specimen. The veins, the texture, the purity of the medicinal smell far beyond ordinary wild herbs. He asked where I found it. I kept it vague. Deep in the mountains. Lucky find. He didn't push. He offered 8 copper coins. Fair. More than fair. I accepted. I didn't leave. My eyes drifted to the old books stacked in the corner. I hesitated, then asked in the simplest words I could. Did he have any old books about strengthening the body? Something passed down from older times? The old man stroked his beard. Something flickered behind his cloudy eyes. He reached under the counter and dug through a dusty wooden box for a long moment. He brought out a small bundle wrapped in dark oilcloth. Inside was an old stitched book, its deep blue cover frayed and faded. The title had mostly worn away. Only 2 characters remained, something like Long Spring. I could make out the word for cultivation. He told me it was a fragment of a breathing and energy technique from ancient times, a method for drawing in the energy of heaven and earth, balancing the body's forces. Practiced well, it could sharpen the senses, prevent illness, extend life. But most of the pages were lost. Only the opening section survived. Just a framework. He said it had been gathering dust in his shop, but still, it was a real technique. I would need to add something more to take it. He slid it toward me. My heart slammed against my ribs. A cultivation method. Right in front of me. Even a fragment. I pressed all the copper coins onto the counter. Then I reached inside my clothes and pulled out the second small packet, the one wrapped in layers of clean leaves. 15 or so grains of spirit grain sat inside, golden green, round and full, glowing faintly. The moment the leaves opened, a clean, sweet warmth filled the small shop and pushed out all the stale smell. I kept my voice very low. I said I had found these in a cliff crack deep in the mountains. Just this small amount. When cooked, they were remarkably fragrant and filling. Eating them left a warming feeling through the whole body. The old man leaned forward. His eyes went sharp in a way I hadn't seen before. He picked up a single grain and held it to the light. Something moved inside it, faint as breath. His voice dropped to almost nothing. He told me this was no ordinary grain. In all his years, he had never seen anything like it. Then his eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my spine go cold. He said, "Carrying this was carrying a disaster. If anyone in town saw even a hint of it, the consequences would be catastrophic." He warned me twice. 3 times. The cold hit me hard. I had known the grain was unusual. I hadn't understood the danger. He moved quickly after that. From under the counter, he produced 3 things: a small packet of salt wrapped in thick oil paper, a half-worn chopping knife with a blade that still held its edge, and a small cloth packet of vegetable seeds, likely turnip or cabbage. He said he couldn't begin to pay the grain's real worth. These were the best he could offer: salt, a blade, seeds. Enough to keep me safe for a while. Salt, a blade, seeds, and the book. Everything I needed most. I pushed the grain across without hesitating and pulled the rest close to my chest. The knife was heavy and cold and real in my hand. It felt like safety. He tucked the grain away in the deepest part of the counter, like hiding a treasure. We looked at each other briefly. Nothing needed to be said. I left with my heart pounding and his warning wrapped around every thought like a chain. I took only the back paths toward the forest, staying off the main road. Just before the tree line, I felt it. A cold, watching feeling on the back of my neck. I crouched to fake tie my shoe and swept the bushes behind me with the corner of my eye. A scarred, rat-like face flashed between the branches. Zhao Lizi. Still there. Still following. Eyes full of spite and greed. I stood up and ran, straight into the trees. No more hiding my speed. I knew this terrain. He didn't. I cut through boulders and gullies and dense brush, changing direction constantly until the sounds behind me faded completely. Back at my rock crevice hideout, I used the new knife to set simple tripwire traps of dry branches and loose stones at the entrance. Then I crawled inside. I stored the salt, knife, and vegetable seeds in the space near the spirit spring. Then I sat down with my back against the cold stone wall, took a slow breath, and unwrapped the oilcloth. The old book was fragile, its pages yellowed and brittle. Much of the ink faded or flaked away. Large sections were simply missing. But the opening pages were mostly intact, breathing instructions written in dense old language, and several rough, faded diagrams of the human body's energy pathways. Tucked between the pages was a loose sheet of coarse paper, showing a seated figure with arrows showing the flow of breath and energy. I traced the faded words with my fingertip in the last thin light coming through the rock crack. My fingers were cold. My heart was burning. I found a small natural cave hidden deep in the rocks, just big enough for one person. I blocked the entrance with large stones and thick vines, leaving only a thin gap for air. Inside, I lit a small pine torch and opened the long spring cultivation fragment. The pages were old and crumbling, the ink faded and blurred. Ancient terms I barely understood: energy sea, heavenly cycle, spirit gate, returning chi to origin. The body diagrams were crude and unclear. Huge sections of the book were simply missing. I wrote down every word I didn't understand on the stone wall in charcoal, with question marks beside each one. Then I started breaking it down the way my modern mind knew how. What exactly did deep, long, fine, even, breathing mean in practice? Where was the lower abdomen point they kept calling the dantian? How was I supposed to feel energy moving if I had never felt it before? I sat cross-legged on dry moss and tried. I breathed slowly, tried to calm my mind and guide my attention inward. It didn't work. My chest tightened. My thoughts scattered. Zhao Lizi's grin, the grain, the space, the unanswered questions in the book. My knees ached. My lower back went numb. After a long time, nothing had happened except deeper exhaustion and a worse headache. Then a thought cut through the frustration. The space. I dropped my mind into the Shinong space. Absolute silence. No wind, no pain, no distraction. Just my own awareness floating in that small enclosed world. I sat my mental body down in the center and tried again. This time I stopped chasing results. I stopped thinking about meridians and pressure points. I just breathed. In, slow, deep, clean. There was something subtly purer about the air in here, almost too faint to notice, but real. Out, slow, releasing. Mind emptying. In again. Out again. The rhythm found itself. Natural and long, like it was falling into alignment with something in the space itself. Then, in the tail end of one long inhale, my awareness shuddered. A thread of something cold and alive, drawn by the focus and the space's faint energy, slipped through and moved, barely, like melting snow, along some invisible path, and settled into my dantian. Gone in an instant. But I felt it clearly. The grinding headache behind my eyes eased, just for a moment. Like cold water touching a burn. That was it. A true chi sensation. Energy entering the body. The very first step of cultivation. I had walked the right path. The space made it easier, more concentrated energy, or simply better conditions for focus. Either way, this was where I would practice. I pulled back to my physical body, picked up the chopping knife, and returned to the space with a new purpose. Time to expand the farmland. The small patch of rich, dark soil. The living earth created by the spirit spring. I marked carefully with stones as sacred ground, not to be touched. Everything outside it was cracked, dead, gray. That was my territory to reclaim. I used the knife through focused mental effort, cutting and turning the hardened soil. It was exhausting work. Turning even a palm-sized patch drained a significant amount of mental energy and left me dizzy. But I kept going. Eventually, I had opened 2 small plots in the poor outer soil, each about the size of a wash basin. I set them up as experiments. Plot 1 was bare dead soil. I scattered ordinary vegetable seeds and common grass seeds on it. Control group, testing the absolute limit of the poor ground. Plot 2 was the same dead soil, but I carefully drew out 1 single drop of the cloudy spirit spring water and let it soak in. Same seeds on top. This would show what even a drop of the spring could do. On the central rich soil, I planted the remaining spirit grain seeds one by one, as carefully as I could manage. At the very edge of that good soil, I saved a small corner and planted a few of the new vegetable seeds there too, just to see how ordinary plants fared in truly good earth. When I was done, the well was visibly lower. I used the last of the spirit spring water to water the 7-leaf grass garden and the newly planted spirit grain, parceling it out drop by drop as carefully as I could. Then I collapsed, completely emptied out. But for the first time, I felt something building instead of just draining away. A few days after settling into my cave, I was out on a sunny slope collecting bitter leaves and wild roots when I heard it, soft, careful footsteps creeping up from behind. I didn't turn around. I straightened up slowly, pretending to stretch, and caught them in the corner of my eye. Zhao Lizi, eyes red from bad sleep, face full of spite. The fat one beside him, both carrying rough wooden clubs. He had tracked me down again, still chasing the smell of the spirit grain from the market. I let my face go frightened and started making excuses, just wild roots, just the smell of mountain flowers. While I talked, my foot quietly shifted a loose stone nearby. My right hand, hidden in my sleeve, tightened around a small cone-shaped packet I had made from tough leaves, filled with the pungent powder of a strong-smelling herb I had ground up earlier, the kind that kept insects away. When Zhao Lizi lunged forward, I screamed, "Wolves, a wolf pack, coming this way," and threw the packet straight at their faces. It burst open in the air. A cloud of sharp green-gray powder exploded across their eyes, noses, and throats. The screaming started immediately, both of them clawing at their burning eyes, coughing, stumbling blind. The fat one broke first, completely convinced by the wolf warning, and ran downhill crashing through the bushes. Zhao Lizi followed, half falling, cursing me as he went. I watched them disappear, then turned and slipped into a dense thorn bush, a narrow path only I knew, and was gone. Safe in the cave, I checked the space. Several days outside had passed, but in the space with its faster time, it was closer to half a month. The results were clear. Plot 1, bare dead soil, was nearly lifeless. A few sickly yellow seedlings barely holding on, thin as thread, struggling in the gray dirt. Ordinary ground could grow almost nothing. Plot 2, dead soil plus 1 drop of spirit spring water, was strikingly different. More seedlings, healthier green, sturdier stems. 1 single drop of spirit water had made a visible difference. The central rich soil plot was thriving. The spirit grain had already grown half a foot tall, thick leaves like green jade, strong upright stems, a clean sweet smell drifting through the space. Growing faster and stronger than anything I had ever seen outside. Even the small cabbage seedlings at the edge of the rich soil were plump and bright green, better than any wild vegetable I had eaten since arriving in this world. The seven-leaf grass was lush and heavy with deep, flowing purple veins, more medicinal than ever. I touched the spirit grain seedlings gently with my mental awareness. I could almost feel the life pulsing in them. Soon the seven-leaf grass would be ready to harvest again. Another trip to trade for salt, better tools, an iron pot, fabric. Maybe even find a way to locate the missing sections of the cultivation manual. Back in my body, I sat cross-legged and closed my eyes. The breathing came easier now. More natural, more settled. Inside the space, the faint spirit energy was a little thicker than the outside mountain air. I drew it in thread by thread, guided it down toward the dantian, let it gather there. The headache that had haunted me for weeks was slowly, steadily retreating. The small seed of energy in my dantian, still fragile as a candle in the wind, was just barely growing stronger with each session. Between meditations, I worked. Mental effort with the knife to keep turning more of the dead outer soil. Charcoal notes on the cave wall tracking each plot's growth, height, color, condition. Every drop of spirit spring water distributed like something sacred, never wasted. But the problems remained. Zhao Lizi was still out there, angry and watching. The spirit spring refilled agonizingly slowly, barely enough for what I already had growing. And the cultivation manual still had enormous gaps I couldn't fill. I looked at the living field in my space, the bright grain, the rich herbs, the tiny well seeping its slow treasure, and breathed out slowly. Then I closed my eyes again, settled my mind, and drew in another thin thread of energy. The path to becoming stronger stretched out ahead of me, one quiet day at a time. I stepped into the space and stopped. The seven-leaf grass had fully matured. Dozens of plants stood tall and full, their thick dark green leaves spread wide. But what stopped my breath were the purple veins, no longer faint and thin, but deep and flowing like ink, pulsing with life. The medicinal smell was so rich and concentrated that breathing it felt like inhaling the very essence of the plant. The ones growing closest to the spirit spring and living soil were even more extraordinary. Heavier leaves, deeper fragrance, a quality completely beyond anything growing in the wild outside. I stood at the edge of the field and just breathed it in. All the exhaustion of recent days lifted. I had never felt this kind of satisfaction in my past life, not in years of studying or working. This was something I had built with my own hands from nothing. I didn't harvest carelessly. I examined each plant, leaf thickness, depth of color, clarity of the veins, and only cut the finest mature leaves, slicing clean at the base with my knife, leaving the young growth untouched so the plants would keep producing. I stacked the harvested leaves on a flat stone in the space, layer by layer, a small fragrant mountain of deep green and purple. This batch was far superior to anything I had traded before. Old Chin would know their worth immediately. Dawn light came through the vine curtain at my cave entrance. I had found this place after searching carefully for days. A hidden valley deep in the mountain, sheltered from wind, facing the sun, screened by massive leaning rocks, and dense thorn bushes at the entrance. Inside was a shallow, dry cave, a clear, cold stream running along the base of the cliff, and almost no signs of large predators. Two narrow paths led in, each barely wide enough for one person sideways. Safe, hidden, water and sunlight both available. This was home. I sat cross-legged on my stone seat and finished my morning cultivation. When I opened my eyes and breathed out, the feeling was different from those first struggling attempts. The energy in my dantian was no longer just a flicker. It had grown, settled, and now moved steadily with each breath like a small underground current finding its path. The changes in my body were real and clear. The exhaustion that used to hit me constantly was gone. My hearing was sharper. I could hear morning dew drop from leaves, a squirrel moving in branches far away, wind touching the vines at the cave entrance. My sight was clearer too, picking out details at distances that would have been blurry before. The wounds and scars from my early days were fading, the skin underneath coming in healthy. My body felt lighter, stronger, grounded in a way that wasn't just physical recovery, but something deeper. Long spring cultivation was a gentle method, steady and balanced, like warm sunlight rather than fire. Even with so much of the text missing, the foundation it built was solid. I had settled into a rhythm now. Morning practice facing the rising sun, night sitting in quiet stillness. Cultivation was no longer a task I forced myself through. It had become as natural as drinking water. My new home, my growing field, my strengthening body and energy. For the first time since arriving in this world, things felt like they were truly moving forward. In the days that followed, I threw myself into building a real home. I cleared the thorny brush from the cave entrance, leaving just enough for natural camouflage. I hauled flat stones up from the stream bed and stacked them carefully into a solid cooking stove inside the cave. Beside it, I built a wider stonework table. I wove vines between the natural rock pillars at the entrance to make a hanging curtain that blended into the surroundings. I gathered armfuls of pine leaves and layered them with woven vines in the driest corner to make a bed, soft, fragrant, dry. At the stream, I stacked stones in a calm section and let the water collect into a small clear pool. When the evening light turned golden across the valley, I stood at the vine curtain and looked at what I had made. A solid cave, a working stove, a stone table, a soft bed, a water pool. Something warm and steady rose up through me and filled my chest. This was mine. My home. My cultivation retreat. When I walked back down to Blackstone Village a few days later, I felt different from the first 2 times. Steadier. Less pale and frightened. The mountain air and daily cultivation had put color back in my face and quiet confidence in my step. I pushed open the creaking door of Old Chen's shop. He looked up and his face creased into a warm smile. He said I looked far healthier than last time, that the mountain was clearly treating me well. I set my cloth bundle on the counter and untied it. Dozens of 7-leaf grass leaves lay inside, separated and cushioned by dry grass. Each one was half a palm wide, thick with juice, the deep purple veins vivid and flowing. The medicinal scent filled the entire shop instantly, pushing out every other smell. Old Chen went very still. Then he leaned forward and picked up a single leaf carefully, held it to the light, traced the veins with his eyes, pressed it gently between his fingers, brought it close to smell. He set it down and shook his head slowly in open amazement. He said in all his years collecting mountain goods, he had only seen quality like this a handful of times. Compared to what I had brought last time, this was a completely different thing altogether. He named a price several times higher than ordinary mountain herbs. It was at the very top of what I had hoped for. I nodded and said he was fair, but I didn't reach for the coins. I looked around his shelves and told him that living in the mountains, goods were more useful to me than money. I started listing what I wanted, more coarse. Salt, lamp oil, a jar of the lard he had just gotten in, several feet of thick rough cloth, needles and thread, a small bag of wheat flour, fresh firestones. Old Chun moved quickly and efficiently, pulling each item from its place and stacking everything on the far end of the counter. The pile grew: salt, a white jar of lard, cloth, a flour bag, needle packets, new firestones. Several times more than my last visit's haul. He counted out the remaining value in copper coins and pushed them across in a small cloth pouch without even pausing to recount. I packed everything carefully into the basket I had brought. Then, without thinking about it, I reached over and straightened a few crooked bamboo baskets on his shelf and res-tacked a loose pile of winnowing trays. Just tidying up, I told him. No need to thank me. He watched that small gesture, and the warmth in his eyes deepened. Before leaving the shop, I casually asked Old Chun about the scab-headed young man I kept seeing around the market, whether he knew who that was. Old Chin's friendly expression dropped immediately. He leaned close and gave me a thorough description, voice full of contempt. Zhao Lizi, orphan young, no family discipline, completely useless. He stole chickens, picked pockets, cheated travelers, and made his living preying on anyone who looked like an easy target. But underneath all the bluster, he was a coward. Run into anyone who pushed back firmly, Old Chin said, and he folded immediately. I thanked him, said I would avoid the man, and left. But I already knew Zhao Lizi would be waiting. Sure enough, just before the forest trail, I felt it, that crawling sensation on the back of my neck, like being watched by something hungry. My cultivation had sharpened my senses considerably. I caught a flash of his scabbed head behind a crooked tree at the bend in the path. I didn't panic. I didn't speed up. I almost smiled. I kept walking at a steady pace, but I changed direction. Not toward my hidden valley home, toward the boulder field I had scouted the day before. It was only 2 or 3 miles from the village. A rough, chaotic stretch of massive rocks jutting up through the forest like broken teeth, covered in wet moss, tangled with vines, full of gaps and dead ends. A natural maze. He followed, still locked onto me. When I entered the boulder field, I suddenly burst into full speed, not in a straight line, but weaving through gaps, over a mossy slope, through a crack barely wide enough for one person sideways. 3 turns. 4. And then the feeling of being watched simply vanished. He had lost me in the stones. I didn't stop there. I pulled out a small strip of gray cloth I had torn from an old garment earlier and hung it carefully on a thorny wild rose branch at the entrance of a path leading deeper into the forest, positioned to look exactly like it had been snagged by someone running through in a hurry. Then I climbed, hand and foot up the side of a large vine-covered boulder nearby, moving quietly through the wet moss and thick vines until I was hidden in a curtain of hanging greenery at the top. I parted the leaves just enough to watch below. Less than a few minutes passed before Zhao Lizi stumbled into the boulder maze, cursing, spinning around, completely confused about where I had gone. He tripped over rocks, tore his clothes on thorns, and crashed around like a man who had never moved carefully in a forest in his life. Then he stopped. His eyes locked onto the gray cloth strip on the thorny branch. In the dim forest light, it stood out clearly, exactly as I had intended. His face split into a victorious grin. He spat on the ground and charged straight for the path it pointed toward, heading deep into the wrong part of the forest entirely. I watched from the top of the boulder as Zhao Lizi crashed through the thorns in completely the wrong direction, cursing and stumbling, completely certain he had found my trail. His voice faded into the forest. Gone. I felt no triumph, just cold clarity. Tricking him once, twice, even 3 times, that wasn't a solution. He would keep coming back. I needed something more permanent. Either frighten him so deeply he never looked my way again, or find a way to let the village hunters or the local headman naturally discover that he had been harassing and threatening traveling traders. A man who scared off outside business would be a problem the village would deal with themselves. I filed that thought away and headed home. When I stepped through my vine curtain in the evening light, the orange and purple sky was glowing over my valley. I set down the heavy basket and felt the weight lift from my shoulders. I sorted everything carefully. The salt jar went in the driest corner near the stove. The lard was raised off the ground on flat stones. Cloth folded and stacked. Needles and thread pushed into a dry rock crack. The flour wrapped twice in oil paper. Firestones tucked under the stove. As I arranged each item, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not just survival. This was a home being tended. I checked the space. The 7-leaf grass plants I had recently harvested were already pushing out new shoots, small pale green buds with faint purple veins, announcing the next round of growth. The little cabbage plants beside them were plump and bright and healthy looking. But what stopped me was the spirit grain field at the center. The stalks were tall and deep green, wide leaves pointing straight up like blades. And the seed heads, full and heavy, hanging in dense clusters, were no longer just green. A faint golden light was spreading across them, soft and warm, not flashy but deep. I could almost feel the energy gathering inside each grain, pure and concentrated, building towards something extraordinary. Almost ready. I watered the grain field and the 7-leaf grass roots with the last careful drops of spirit spring water and watched them soak in silently. Then came the harder question. What do I do when it's fully ripe? Selling it to old Chun was risky. Even he had warned me about the danger of showing it. Eating it myself was safest but wasteful. I needed to think about this more carefully, maybe wait until I had accumulated enough to make a real decision. I left the space and went outside. The sun was sinking behind the mountains, painting everything gold and red. I had wild onions sizzling in my stone pot and fresh space-grown cabbage ready to add. The smell of real cooked food mixed with the evening mountain air and drifted across my small home ground. But I sat down before eating, cross-legged on the warm sunlit stone platform. Facing the last of the sunset, I settled into my cultivation, breathing long and steady, matching the rhythm of the mountain wind. The energy thread in my dantian, noticeably stronger and warmer than even a few days ago, moved through my meridians with a cleaner, more confident flow than before. Each cycle felt like rain soaking into dry ground. The cooking smoke rose above the cave. The vines swayed at the entrance. The spirit field waited, glowing quietly in the space. The mountain valley was peaceful. I sat in the fading golden light, face calm, no fear and no hurry, just the steady feeling of someone who has found their footing and can see the road ahead. The next morning, I entered the space and held my breath. The spirit grain had fully ripened overnight. Every stalk stood firm and straight, heavy seed heads bowing low under their own weight. The grains were no longer pale green or half golden. They glowed with a warm, deep gold, smooth and full, each one round as a pearl. A faint light moved across their surfaces, too subtle to miss. The visible sign of pure energy gathered inside. The smell hit me before anything else, sweet, clean, warm and deep all at once, filling the entire space so completely that just breathing felt nourishing. A gentle ripple moved through the golden field. The nearby cabbage shone deep green beside it, vivid by contrast. I stood at the edge and let the feeling wash over me. Then I steadied myself, picked up my knife, and stepped carefully in. I harvested each stalk with the same care I would give something sacred. Left hand supporting the stem, right hand drawing the blade in one smooth, clean stroke. Each heavy head of grain dropped into my palm without a single grain lost. I laid them on the flat stone in careful rows, building a small golden pile. The total harvest was only 3 to 5 pounds of grain in the husk. A small amount, but this was the first real harvest, the true foundation. Back outside, I brought a small bundle of the grain into the physical world and sat down at my stone stove in the evening light. I had one tool for husking, a large clean clamshell, washed many times in the stream. I pressed each grain head against the curved inner surface and worked my thumb slowly along it, careful not to crush anything. Too little pressure and nothing moved. Too much and the grain was ruined. The sound was a quiet rhythmic scraping, steady as the birdsong around me. One by one the husks came away in small round grains, golden green, glowing faintly, each one perfect, dropped into the shell. With every grain freed, a purer, sweeter smell rose up. I breathed it in slowly. When the last grain fell, I looked at the small pile in my palm. About 100 grains, each one gleaming like a tiny piece of jade. I carried them to my small stone-walled pool at the stream and rinsed them in the clear mountain water. As the water moved over them, the grains seemed to glow even cleaner, as if the water was revealing something that had always been inside. I tipped them into the small clay pot I had traded for at Old Chin's shop, added cold spring water to just 2 finger widths above the grains, put the lid on with a small gap, and set it over the fire. Pine branches crackled and popped. The pot began to bubble softly. Then, slowly, undeniably, a smell unlike anything I had cooked before began to drift out through the gap in the lid. The smell reached me before the lid came off. It was like the purest grain in the world had been mixed with warm sunlight and clean mountain air. Rich and sweet and deep, it swept through the entire valley and pushed out every other smell. Just breathing it made my mouth water and my whole body feel awake. When I lifted the lid, a thick cloud of steam rolled out. Underneath it, the porridge was white and smooth as jade, almost translucent. The grains floating in it were no longer golden. They had turned clear white, round and full, gleaming like tiny pearls in the pale broth. I scooped a small spoonful, blew it cool, and put it in my mouth. Warm, silky smooth. And then the taste hit. Pure, deep, sweet grain, nothing mixed in, nothing artificial. The finest thing I had eaten in 2 lifetimes. The outer part of each grain was soft as silk. The inside had a gentle, satisfying chew, and when it broke open, a second wave of sweetness flooded my mouth. Then the warmth spread downward, through my chest, into my stomach, outward through my arms and legs, and all the way to my fingers. Every muscle loosened. Every ache from days of working and moving through the mountain dissolved like ice in spring. The cold I had been carrying for weeks simply left. And something more. A thin thread of the grain's energy drifted toward my dantian and settled there, feeding the cultivation energy I had been building. The flow inside me felt cleaner and fuller afterward, like a lamp given fresh oil. I sat there with the bowl in both hands, eyes warm. All the suffering since crossing into this world, the cold, the hunger, the wounds, the fear, for a moment it all felt paid back in full. This, I said quietly to no one, is what it means to be alive. I decided then. Most of the spirit grain would be stored secretly. It was too dangerous to show anyone and too valuable to waste. A small amount I would use for myself during cultivation. The rest would wait until I was stronger and had found a truly trustworthy way to use it. I sat down outside and practiced long spring cultivation in the last of the evening light. The warmth from the grain was still moving through me, and the cultivation energy flowed smoother than it ever had before. What had been a thread was now closer to a cord, denser, stronger, more real. I could feel the first real breakthrough getting close, like something just on the other side of a thin membrane. My senses had sharpened noticeably. I could hear a squirrel cracking a nut dozens of meters away in the forest. I could see the texture of cliff rock on the far side of the valley. My old scars had faded almost completely into healthy skin. I walked to the stream and looked at my reflection in the clear water. The pale, hollow-eyed refugee I had been when I first arrived in this world was gone. The person looking back was healthy, steady, clear-eyed. Back in the space, I carefully husked the rest of the harvest by hand. The same slow, careful process, pressing each grain free without crushing it. When every grain was done, I had just over 2 pounds of clear golden green rice. I sealed it in a clean clay jar with layers of oil paper and cloth tied tight at the top, marked it with a basic spatial anchor to prevent it from ever being lost accidentally, and placed it in the most secure and hidden corner of the space. Safe, protected, waiting for what came next. I also harvested the cabbage from the space. Half a basket of plump, bright green leaves, so fresh they almost glowed. I tucked some dry grass in the bottom of the basket to make it look less unusual and headed back to the village. Even with the grass covering them, the cabbages stood out immediately. People glanced at the basket as I walked through the market. Old Chun heard the door and looked up from his abacus. His hand stopped moving the moment he saw the basket. He came around the counter without a word, pinched off a small leaf, smelled it, then put it in his mouth and chewed. His eyes brightened. He said in 60 years of collecting village produce, he had never seen cabbage like this. The leaves were like fine silk. The stems were impossibly crisp. He asked, half joking and half serious, if I had found a fairy garden somewhere in the mountains. I kept my expression modest and said it was just a shaded spot with good water and decent soil. Just luck. He didn't believe the luck part. He offered me a price 30% higher than I expected, without any negotiation. This time I traded for more coarse salt, a small jar of wild honey with a faint floral smell, a rare find, several pieces of tanned hide for winter shoes and knee guards, and a wide variety of ordinary vegetable and herb seeds. Old Chin packed everything quickly, clearly pleased with the cabbage and already planning to keep a few heads for himself. As I was getting ready to leave, he coughed, a rough, thick sound. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small oil paper packet I had prepared earlier. Some dried herbs I had picked for clearing the throat, I told him. Dried in the sun, nothing fancy. Just something to brew in hot water for his cough. He stopped and looked at the packet for a moment. Then his face softened completely. He thanked me warmly and tucked it away with care. With his gratitude came conversation. He leaned close and told me Zhao Lizi had fallen badly 2 days ago, stumbling around the boulder field at dusk, apparently up to no good as usual, and had stepped wrong on a rock. Fell face first and split his forehead open on a sharp stone. Currently lying in his shed making noise about it. The village had been noticeably quieter since. I let my expression show just the right amount of surprise. Sounds like fate, I said. Then I asked casually if there was a blacksmith in the village. My chopping knife had developed some chips in the blade. Old Chin answered without hesitation. Old Lee, east end of the village near the riverbank, the one with the broken hoe hanging at his door. Solid craftsman, honest man. And if I needed a large storage crock, there were a few old ones in old Lee's back courtyard changing hands. He offered to put in a word for me. I thanked him genuinely and walked out into the morning. My pack was heavy again, but my step was light. In the village, I was becoming a familiar face. The quiet young herb collector who knew his plants, grew unusually good vegetables, didn't cause trouble, and knew how to show respect. That reputation was worth more than copper coins. The walk back to my valley was peaceful for the first time in weeks. Knowing Zhao Lizi was lying in his shed nursing a cracked head made even the weight of my pack feel lighter. Just birdsong and wind in the pines. Back home, I sorted everything carefully. Hides in the dry corner, honey jar wrapped and stored, salt sealed tight, seeds in separate packets. The sweet smell of the honey mixed with wood smoke and made the cave feel genuinely warm and lived in. For dinner, I cooked the space cabbage simply, 1 drop of lard in the pot, high heat, the leaves tossing in the oil until bright and glossy, then spring water and a pinch of salt for a clear, fragrant broth. I toasted a rough wheat cake over the embers until both sides were golden, tore off pieces, and dipped them in the soup. The clean sweetness of the cabbage against the plain wheat, honest food made from honest work. I sat at the cave entrance eating slowly, watching the last sunlight fade. Outside near the cave, I had planted a few ordinary radish and wild garlic seedlings in a small, visible patch of ground, deliberately unremarkable, the kind of struggling garden that would attract no attention from anyone passing by. I checked the space before sleeping. The new spirit grain seeds I had planted that morning had already sprouted. Tiny pale green shoots, thin as needles, standing in neat rows on the rich dark soil. A full day outside, but the space's accelerated time had already pushed them past germination. I let out a long, slow breath and sat down to cultivate. For 7 days, I kept the same rhythm. Each morning, I ate a small bowl of rice mixed with a few grains of spirit rice and ordinary coarse grain together, my cultivation food. I called it that to myself. Not to hoard the spirit grain uselessly, but not to waste it either. A small amount daily, mixed in, just enough to build on. On the 7th day, the difference was clear. I drank the warm mixed porridge, felt the familiar spread of warmth through my body, and immediately settled into cultivation. The energy in my dantian, which had felt like a thick thread for weeks, responded to the spirit grain's nourishment like a plant responding to rain. It came alive. I guided the energy carefully along the simplest circuit in the long spring cultivation text, the basic small heavenly cycle, the foundation path through the body's core meridians. Every other time I had attempted this, the energy would thin and nearly vanish at the difficult points, like water disappearing into cracked earth. This time it didn't stop. The warmth from the spirit grain pushed it forward wherever it had stalled before. The energy moved through each passage cleanly, no resistance, no fading, like a river finding a channel that had finally been cleared all the way through. A soundless thunder broke open somewhere deep inside me. The energy completed its full circuit, and instead of fading as it returned to my dantian, it kept going, on its own, a steady, quiet, self-sustaining loop, turning through my meridians without needing me to push it. My dantian felt warm, almost glowing. The rough thread of energy I had been building for months was gone. In its place was something denser, smoother, carrying a faint blue-green light, alive in a way it hadn't been before. I opened my eyes. Everything in the cave was sharper. Every flicker of the fire, every crack in the rock wall, dust particles on the ground near the entrance. I could hear dry leaves scraping across the earth outside, the distant sound of a stream, a night bird calling far away, each sound distinct and clear. I closed my fist. Power surged up from my bones and muscles, more than I had ever felt in this body. First level of chi cultivation. I had broken through. I looked at my hands for a long moment. The spirit grain had made this possible. Without it, months more of grinding effort, maybe longer. This world looked different now. The next morning, I walked into Old Chen's shop with a full basket of 7-leaf grass and space-grown vegetables. He greeted me warmly, said the herbs I had given him for his cough had helped considerably, better than any autumn had been in years. We traded as usual, smooth and fair. 2 hunters came in while we finished. One noticed my herb basket and commented that my plants always looked more vigorous than what they found themselves. I took the opening and casually mentioned a couple of useful common plants. One with serrated edges and small purple flowers that stopped bleeding well when crushed on a wound. Another with a sharp smell that repelled insects when dried or boiled and rubbed on the skin. Nothing unusual, I said. Just things anyone might find. Just useful to know. Their interest was immediate and genuine. These were plants they had seen 100 times, but never knew the purpose of. I kept my tone casual and reminded them not to eat anything unfamiliar. Mountain plants needed respect. That small gesture of sharing without showing off opened something. From that day on, I was no longer an outsider in the village. People greeted me like someone they knew. They mentioned where wild boar had been troubling the back mountain, or that a new traveling merchant had arrived, or which family had welcomed a new baby. I started responding to occasional questions about herbs they had collected themselves, always staying within what a knowledgeable but ordinary herb gatherer would know. Someone mentioned in passing that Zhao Lizi had finally appeared again after nursing his ankle for nearly 2 weeks. Strangely quiet these days, they said, keeping to himself. I just smiled and said nothing. 2 days later, I walked slowly through the east end of the village at sunset, carrying an oil paper parcel in my hand. Inside was roasted mountain rabbit I had prepared with wild pepper and fragrant leaves. The smell was rich and impossible to ignore. 2 shapes crept out from behind a mud wall ahead. Zhao Lizi and his companion, eyes locked immediately on the parcel, throats visibly working at the smell. But when they looked at my face, they stopped. Something had changed, and they felt it immediately. My pace was unhurried but grounded, like someone who belonged exactly where they stood. And my eyes, calm, clear, with a depth that hadn't been there before. None of the nervousness of a lone outsider. None of the fear they had always relied on. Zhao Lizi's hand went unconsciously to his still healing ankle. He thought of the fall. A chill moved through him. I didn't acknowledge them. I walked to a large rounded boulder by the roadside and rested my hand on it casually. 5 fingers laid across the stone, relaxed, unhurried. My fingers pressed lightly into the boulder. A quiet cracking sound. When I lifted my hand, 5 clear finger-shaped impressions had sunk into the stone, with thin cracks spreading outward from each one like a spider's web across half the boulder's surface. I brushed the stone dust from my fingertips and turned to look at Zhao Lizi and his companion. Their mouths were open. I tossed the oil paper parcel of roasted rabbit meat, and it landed neatly at Zhao Lizi's feet. Then I spoke quietly and plainly. I told them I had a simple offer. Work for me. Carry messages, keep their ears open, stay out of trouble, and they would eat well and earn copper coins regularly. But if I ever caught them following me again or causing problems for anyone in the village, the stone would be a reminder of what that meant. I let them look at the cracked boulder one more time. Then I told them what they already knew, that their current life of stealing and running from everyone was exhausting and dangerous. This was a better option. No complicated thinking required. Zhao Lizi and his companion looked at each other. Then they bent at the waist in a deep bow and practically fell over each other, agreeing. Wang Ji this, Wang Ji that. Whatever I needed, wherever I pointed. I handed over a few coins and a piece of meat and told them simply, watch for any unusual talk about rare mountain goods or herbs, and let me know if any unfamiliar strangers came into the village asking around. Report to me near Old Chen's shop. Keep their mouths completely shut. They nodded like their heads might fall off and vanished down the road. A few days later, I was sitting outside my cave in the warm noon sun, eating a bowl of mixed spirit rice and ordinary grain with fresh-picked space vegetables. The smell drifted quietly through the mountain air. Without warning, a streak of gold and red shot out of the tree canopy and landed on a branch nearby. A small bird, slightly larger than a sparrow, but nothing like a sparrow. Gold-brown feathers on its head and back that caught the light like silk. A chest of deep red-orange. A small beak and tiny claws the color of warm jade. It sat watching me with quick black eyes, and those eyes kept going back to my rice bowl. It called out sharply, then again, impatient, almost demanding. I smiled and flicked a grain of ordinary rice toward it. The bird became a blur and snatched it from the air before it could fall, swallowed it instantly, then looked back at my bowl with even more urgency than before. It actually lifted one small claw and pointed toward the bowl twice. This bird was choosing what it wanted. I pinched a half grain of spirit rice from the bowl's edge. Instead of throwing it, I slowly extended my open palm toward the rock in front of me and waited, keeping my gaze calm and still, trying to let the peacefulness reach it. The bird's eyes moved between my face, my hand, and the surroundings. Several times, the spirit energy coming from that half grain was clearly pulling at it. Then it landed in my palm. Fast as a blink, it snatched the grain, tipped its head back, and swallowed. Then it made a different sound, soft, short, content. Not the demanding calls from before. Something quieter and warmer. And it didn't fly away. It turned its small gold-red head sideways and rubbed its cheek gently against my thumb, once, twice. Warm and light and real. Something between us had just begun. The little bird stayed on my thumb for a long moment before flying back to its branch. I decided then, every meal, I would set aside a few grains of spirit rice for it. A companion in the mountains was worth more than I could calculate. That evening I sat outside on the warm stone platform and practiced cultivation as the sun went down. The energy in my dantian moved cleanly and steadily through its full circuit, stronger and more settled with each passing day. The spirit grain was nourishing the breakthrough I had made, locking it in place. My body felt good, strong, clear, alive in a way I had never experienced before arriving in this world. My senses were sharp. My thinking was quick and uncluttered. In the space, the new spirit grain seedlings were showing their first faint golden threads in the leaf veins, the second generation, already looking healthier than the first. Outside, the small decoy vegetable garden was growing quietly by the cave entrance. The seven-leaf grass was lush and fragrant. My home was orderly and felt genuinely mine. I was no longer a stranger here. The village knew me as the reliable herb collector Wang. Old Chen trusted me as a trading partner. Zhao Lizi and his friend feared and respected me. And my new small companion, the gold-red mountain bird, was already sitting on the rock beside me, grooming its feathers and occasionally pecking at the spirit rice grains I left out. The next morning, I went into the space with a new level of clarity. Breaking through to the first cultivation level had sharpened my connection to the space considerably. I expanded the farmland. With one focused intention, the outer barren edges turned over and spread outward, more than double the previous area. Poor soil, nothing like the living core ground, but more space meant more future. Then I tried something new with the spirit spring. Instead of dripping the water directly onto specific spots, I pulled a small amount upward and spread it into a fine mist that drifted across the newly opened ground evenly. The gray cracked soil softened visibly wherever the mist touched it. This was far more efficient. The same amount of spring water could cover much more ground. Given enough time, even the outer areas could eventually support spirit grain. I checked the growing fields. The second spirit grain crop was thriving, heavier and fuller than the first generation. I planted some ordinary radish seeds in a separate trial patch, watered with spirit spring mist, just to see what the spirit environment would do to common vegetables. Back outside, I looked at the leftover material from husking the spirit grain, bran and small broken grains, faintly golden, still carrying traces of spirit energy. Throwing it away felt wrong. I remembered something vague from my past life. Rice wine, fermentation, starter culture. I mixed the bran and broken grains with ordinary coarse rice and steamed it all together. While it was still warm, I crumbled in a piece of wild yeast I had found growing in a shaded corner, something the original Wang Feng's memories had recognized. I stirred everything together and packed it into a clean, wide-bellied clay jar, sealed the mouth with coarse cloth and mud. Then I moved the whole jar into the space. Stable temperature, clean air, no dust or seasonal variation. If anything could speed up fermentation safely, it was in there. I patted the sealed jar and smiled to myself. If it worked, I would have spirit grain rice wine, something with a trace of spirit energy and entirely my own. If it failed, the whole batch would make decent fertilizer. Either way, nothing was wasted. One night during cultivation, I discovered something entirely new. As the energy circled through my dantian, I turned my awareness inward, and it was like a third eye opened somewhere behind my forehead. Dim and gauzy at first, but real. I could see my own dantian as a small warm pool, the blue-green energy moving through it in quiet, steady loops. I could trace the faint outlines of the meridians it traveled through. Then I pushed that awareness outward. Still with my eyes closed, the space around the cave unfolded in my mind. Not just sounds and smells, but something richer. A small ant feeling its way along a crack in the rock wall. A blade of grass swaying at the cave entrance. A drop of dew sliding from its tip. And perched on a branch a few meters away, a small gold-red shape, feathers settling after landing. The range was only a few meters, but it was a completely different kind of knowing. This was spirit sense, and it had arrived with my cultivation breakthrough. I named the bird Jean Ling, Golden Wings. The little creature seemed to approve, or at least didn't object. Each morning it arrived for its spirit rice crumbs, landing on my outstretched hand, its warm jade-colored claws gripping my fingers while it ate. Over time I had learned to read its calls, happy, impatient, mildly complaining. We had our own language. That value proved itself sooner than I expected. One afternoon, I was working near the space's outer farmland, guiding the spring mist across the new soil, when Jinling suddenly exploded off my shoulder. Every feather stood on end. It shrieked in sharp, rapid bursts, beating its wings against my neck, beak jabbing toward the tall grass behind and to my right. My spirit sense fired in the same instant. A dark-patterned triangle-headed snake was gliding silently out of the grass, vertical pupils locked onto my bare ankle, body already coiled to strike. I didn't step back. I just pressed my foot down on a loose stone and flicked it. The pebble hit the snake just behind its head. It writhed and vanished into deeper cover. If Jinling hadn't warned me a half-second earlier, if my spirit sense hadn't confirmed the threat immediately, the outcome would have been very different. I stroked the bird's still ruffled feathers and sent a gentle pulse of cultivation energy into it. Jinling rubbed its head against my cheek and made a low, contented sound. A few days later, I tested something. I hid a small red-dyed stone in the bushes near the cave and described it to Jinling with gestures, holding out spirit rice crumbs as a reward. The bird tilted its head, studied me, then flew up and circled the bushes twice. One quick dive into the branches. It came back with the red stone in its beak and dropped it in my palm, then looked up with unmistakable pride. I laughed properly for the first time in a long while and gave it double the promised reward. Later, I met Zhao Lizi near Old Chen's shop for his report. He was eager and nervous as always, listing off village gossip. An old hunter had spotted some useful herbs in the wild boar woods. A widow's chicken had been taken by a weasel. A traveling merchant with needles and thread had passed through. Nothing alarming. No strange faces asking unusual questions. That was exactly what I needed to hear. I tossed him some salted dried meat and a few copper coins and told him to keep watching, especially for unfamiliar faces and anyone who seemed to have real abilities. He caught everything midair and swore up and down that he and his companion would keep their eyes peeled every waking hour. I stopped by Old Chen's shop and brought him a few radishes from my space garden, grown with spirit spring water, smooth-skinned, heavy, giving off a subtle sweet smell even before being cut. I told him to try one. He bit into a piece and his eyes went wide. Sweet, crisp, full of juice. None of the sharp or earthy bite of ordinary radishes, with a faint, pleasant warmth that settled in the chest afterward. He couldn't stop praising it. He disappeared into the back room and came out with two things: a small packet of aged tea he said was good for settling the mind, and a worn old book called Record of 100 Herbs. Not a cultivation manual, he explained. Just folk knowledge passed down from older times. Ways to identify plants and stones, old remedies, local legends. He had no use for it anymore and thought I might enjoy it. I accepted both with genuine gratitude. The tea was a kind gift, but the book was exactly what I needed, a way to fill the gaps in the original Wang Feng's memories about mountain plants and local knowledge. This had gone beyond trading. This was the beginning of something like friendship. Several villagers saw the exchange. They had also seen Zhao Lizi bow respectfully when passing me earlier. Old Chen's warmth and the gift only reinforced what people were already thinking, that this quiet young herb collector was someone worth knowing. 7 days later, I opened the fermentation jar from the space. The smell hit me before the seal was fully off. Rich, complex, warm, grain wine mixed with the clean sweetness of spirit rice and something wilder from the yeast. And underneath it all, a faint but unmistakable thread of spirit energy. I poured a small bowl. The liquid was cloudy amber with rice particles still floating in it. I took a sip, rough on the tongue at first, then a wave of warmth and sweetness. Not refined, but real. And as it settled into my stomach, the warmth spread outward through my whole body, carrying that thin thread of spirit energy into the meridians. The fatigue I had been carrying dissolved. My mind felt cleaner. It had worked. Crude spirit grain wine, good enough for my own use. I was taking a second sip when Jinling exploded off my shoulder, every feather up, screaming, beating its wings at my face and pointing hard at the sky above the cave entrance. I dropped into focus immediately. A black dot in the sky was spiraling down at speed, growing fast. Within moments, a large gray-blue eagle landed on the boulder just outside my cave. It was far bigger than any mountain hawk I had seen. Feathers with a cold metallic sheen, and eyes of clear bright gold that cut like blades. Those eyes were locked on my wine bowl. I held still and watched. There was no aggression in it, no hunting intent, just pure focused desire aimed at the smell coming from my cup and what might have been the eagle equivalent of drooling. I almost laughed. I walked slowly to the cave entrance and poured the rest of the bowl onto the open ground in front of me. The eagle was off the rock before the liquid hit the dirt. It landed, bent its great head, and drank every drop from the earth with careful, precise movements of its hooked beak. When it finished, it lifted its head and made a low, satisfied sound. Then it looked at me again, and something in its golden eyes had shifted, less measuring, more open. It called once, loud and clear, the sound rolling through the mountain. Then it launched upward, circled once overhead, and dropped something on the way. A single feather, half a foot long, glowing with a faint jade-green light, spiraled slowly down and landed in the dirt at my feet. The eagle called one more time, looked at me directly, then turned and flew hard into the deep mountains until it was gone. I picked up the feather. It was warm to the touch, smooth as polished stone, and the jade light in it didn't fade. I picked up the feather and turned it in my fingers. It was heavier than it looked, smooth and warm, deep blue-gray with faint golden patterns along the edges, and I could feel a thin current of wind energy moving around it in small circles. This was no ordinary bird. Whatever that eagle was, it had come from somewhere deeper in the mountains than I had explored. A few quiet days passed. I sat outside each evening with a cup of my rough spirit grain wine, Jinling dozing on my shoulder, watching the mountains where the eagle had disappeared. The space's second grain crop was growing full and heavy. The new farmland was taking shape. Everything felt steady and purposeful. Then one morning while I was working with the spirit spring mist in the space, Jinling screamed. Not the sharp alert from the snake. Something more urgent and more frightened than that. The bird dropped out of the sky like a falling star and crashed onto my shoulder, every feather standing up, claws digging hard into my clothes, shaking. I tried to calm it and focus on what it was pushing into my awareness. What came through was cold and violent and massive, gray shapes crowding together in a deep valley to the east. Wolf eyes catching light. Not a hunting party, a pack, a large one, moving toward the village below. I was on my feet before I had finished processing it. The village was my connection to the outside world, my source of information, and home to people who had treated me with genuine kindness. Old Chun, the villagers who greeted me by name now. I couldn't sit in my cave while they were swallowed up. I moved fast through the forest. At first clearing, I found Zhao Lizi idling under a crooked tree. I told him directly, and without wasting words, run to the village head and Old Chun immediately. Tell them a large wolf pack is gathered at Eagle Ravine and moving toward the village. Larger than anything seen before. Everyone indoors, all able-bodied men armed. The hunters organizing defense right now. Zhao Lizi went pale at the words wolf pack. He grabbed his companion and ran downhill without another word, faster than I had ever seen him move. I stayed at the tree line and watched toward Eagle Ravine. Something cold was building in the air. I could feel it. The warning hit the village like a stone dropped in still water. The elder rang the old bronze bell at the village entrance. Doors slammed. Children cried. People called to each other across the lanes in frightened voices. But not everyone was frightened. A loud young hunter named Zhang Yong, son of the old hunt master, pushed back immediately. He called the warning an exaggeration, maybe a few stray wolves at most. Several young hunters rallied around him, eager and dismissive, talking about wolf pelts and easy kills. Old Chun and the village elder begged them to stay inside. Jinling was a spirit bird. They argued. The warning was real. Zhang Yong and 3 companions grabbed their spears and bows and headed for the mountain path anyway. They found 2 scouts, lone wolves separated from the main pack. Shot them cleanly. Killed them both. They came back carrying the bodies like trophies, laughing, and some of the villagers who hadn't understood the real scale of the threat started to relax at the sight. Old Chun and the old hunt master looked at the 2 dead wolves with white faces. They were not reassured. Those 2 wolves hadn't been strays. They had been scouts. That night the howling started. From every direction, from every part of the mountains surrounding the valley, wolf cries tore through the darkened waves. Jinling dropped onto my knee and pushed images into my mind. The gray shapes from the ravine, moving, organizing, converging on the village. I understood immediately what had gone wrong. Zhang Yang's kill of those 2 scout wolves hadn't deterred the pack. It had provoked them into moving early. By the next morning, dozens of wolves surrounded the village completely. Green eyes everywhere. Low rolling growls. The wooden fence at the village entrance was being clawed and rammed apart. Holes had been gouged through the mud walls in 2 places. Villagers were pressed behind their doors. Women holding children silent. Hunters firing arrows from the rooftops under old Zhang's hoarse commands. The pack's leader was unmistakable. A silver-gray wolf nearly the size of a small cow, one eye gone, the other gleaming with cold intelligence. It paced behind the main assault, giving low rumbling commands that sent the pack surging forward in coordinated waves. A wolf king, then Old Chun and Zhang the elder broke through a thin spot in the encirclement, covered in blood and mud, and half fell up the mountain path toward my valley with Zhao Lizi guiding them. Old Chun dropped to his knees before he reached me. He begged me to help, voice broken, tears running freely. Zhang the elder did the same, said he knew I was no ordinary person, said his own life was mine if I saved the village, said he. Knew it was too late to undo what his son had done. I listened to the howling carrying up from below and made my decision without much struggle. These people had been kind to me. This valley was my home now, and there was no version of myself that walked away from this. I told Old Chun and Zhang to get behind the valley and hide. Then I turned to Zhao Lizi. I came over the village fence like a shadow and took in the battlefield quickly. Jin Ling was already circling high overhead, feeding me a clear picture from above. Wolf positions, the direction of the main push, the weak points in the defense, and most importantly, the one-eyed Wolf King's position on a cluster of rocks. Behind the pack, I directed Zhao Lizi to run to Zhang the Elder on the roof and get all the archers concentrated behind the broken north wall, told him to have them hold that section and not worry about anything else. Then I moved through the chaos along the outer edge of the battle, keeping out of the wolf sight lines, circling around behind the main pack toward the tree line. From my space, I pulled out what I had prepared, a clay jar of flammable oil I had traded for and kept, and 2 large packets of the finely ground spice powder I had used against Zhao Lizi months before, but far more of it this time. I hurled the oil jar into the dry brush behind the wolf pack. It shattered. A stray spark from the impact caught immediately, and a wall of fire rose up, cutting off the wolves' retreat and splitting their formation. Before they could react, I threw both powder packets directly into the densest cluster pushing toward the fence. The packets burst. A thick white cloud of choking spice dust exploded through the pack center. Wolves inhaled it and collapsed into sneezing, howling confusion, eyes streaming, unable to coordinate or charge. The ones at the edges stumbled backward in panic. Even the Wolf King, steady until now, began snarling and shifting with agitation as the smoke and powder drifted toward him. The assault dissolved into chaos. The chaos from the smoke and fire was my opening. The Wolf King was disoriented for the first time. Just 10 meters away, with the pack between us broken and scattered. I moved. I launched myself forward at full speed, knife in hand. Cultivation energy flowing into the blade until the edge carried a faint cold light. The Wolf King sensed me coming and didn't run. It lunged straight at me, jaws open, massive and fast. My spirit sense slowed everything down just enough. I read its path, slipped sideways at the last instant, and drove the knife in a clean arc across its exposed belly as we passed each other. The sound it made when the blade hit was horrible. The cut was deep. The Wolf King crashed to the ground, rolling and screaming, silver gray, fur going dark with blood and dirt. Every wolf in the pack saw it fall. That sound, their king's death cry, combined with the fire, the choking smoke, and the hunters suddenly shooting with renewed confidence and accuracy from the rooftops, it broke them completely. Fear spread through the pack like a wave. The vicious eyes went dull. The growling turned to whimpering. I stood over the Wolf King with my bloodied knife and let everything I had, cultivation energy, intent, presence, push outward in one word. Leave. They ran. Every single one of them, tails tucked, crashing into the forest and disappearing into the dark. The village went silent. Then it erupted. Doors flew open. People poured out into the lanes, saw the retreating wolves, saw the fallen Wolf King, saw me standing there. The village elders started to kneel. Old Chen followed. Then everyone. I stepped forward and stopped them before it could happen. I told them I lived here now. This was my mountain too, and looking after it was simply what you did. I kept my voice steady and warm. Zhang Yong pushed through the crowd and bowed deeply, voice cracking. He said his recklessness had caused all of this and thanked me for saving everyone, including his father. He offered himself completely. Wherever I pointed, he would go. I accepted the apology simply and turned to the practical work. I told everyone, treat the wounded, reinforce every broken section of fence and wall right now. Don't relax. The Wolf King was injured, but likely alive somewhere in the mountains. Pax remembered. Zhao Lizi and Zhang Yong were to lead the cleanup, collect the wolf bodies for their pelts, and waste nothing. People moved, purposefully, with clear direction. They looked at me differently now, not as the quiet herb collector from the mountain, but as someone who belonged to this place in a different way entirely. When the last of the grateful visitors had gone, Old Chun and Zhang the Elder bringing cured wolf pelts and good meat as thanks, I finally returned to my space. The second spirit grain harvest was waiting. I stepped in and stopped breathing for a moment. The entire field was gold, richer and heavier than the first harvest. Longer stalks, fuller grain heads, bowing under their own weight. The smell alone was almost enough to set my cultivation energy moving on its own. I harvested everything carefully, using the small sickle the space had produced as a natural tool over time. Each bundle tied with the same unhurried sense of ritual. Then I husked and processed the grain until every kernel was clean and stored. The final count was a full large clay jar, perhaps 10 pounds of spirit grain rice, each grain round and glowing softly, packed full to the rim. I set the jar down and just looked at it for a long moment. From near death in a freezing shed to this. My own home, my own field, my own cultivation, my own place in the world. I let myself feel all of it. 10 pounds of spirit grain. I held the jar and let the weight of it settle in my hands. This was real security, enough spirit energy to push through to the second and possibly third level of cultivation. Combined with the village's trust, the space's growing output, and my own developing abilities, everything felt like it was genuinely moving forward. That night, I sat in the courtyard under the rising moon with the grain jar beside me and practiced cultivation. The space's concentrated spirit energy and the faint essence drifting naturally from the fresh grain flowed together into my breathing and gathered in my dantian, building on the small advancement I had made during the fight. Below, the village lights came on one by one. The fear was fading. The peace that comes after being protected was settling in. Zhao Lizi and his companions stood guard at my valley entrance, straighter than I had ever seen them. Jean Ling sat on the rim of the grain jar, preening its feathers and occasionally rubbing its head against my hand. Quiet and right. That was the only way to describe it. The next day, I went deep into the space and did something I hadn't done before. Instead of simply using the spirit spring, I studied it. I lowered my spirit sense down slowly along the spring walls, past the moss and stone, all the way to the deepest point where the water first emerged. And there, in the cracks of the dark rock at the very bottom, I found something new. A thin layer of blue-green moss, barely visible, almost transparent, pressed into the stone. Under my spirit sense it glowed with a faint, steady light. And it was producing something, converting the space's energy into a clean, gentle spirit essence that fed back into the spring water and the living soil around it. This moss was the spring's living core, its purifying heart. I stopped directing the water roughly and changed everything about how I approached it. Instead of pushing and guiding, I let my awareness flow like still water, touching the moss gently, circling around it slowly, feeding warmth from my own cultivation energy into the flow without forcing anything. Nurturing instead of taking. Protecting instead of extracting. It was exhausting work, far more draining than ordinary cultivation. Sweat gathered at my temples. But I kept the slow, careful rhythm going for a full incense stick's worth of time. When I finally pulled back, the change was small but definite. The moss glowed fractionally stronger. The stone around it looked slightly more moistened. The spring was producing water just a little faster than before. I sat back and looked at the clear water flowing steadily from the source. This moss was fragile. It needed tending, not using. The right approach was patience, slow and steady, building gradually, never rushing what couldn't be forced. I looked across to where the gold grain heads swayed gently in the space's still air, their surfaces catching and releasing light. Everything good here had grown this way, one careful day at a time. Before dawn, I had my spirit grain porridge cooking on the small stone stove outside the cave, the smell of it drifting across the quiet valley. Salted wild greens and steamed pumpkin on the side. Simple and good. I sat on the stone step and practiced cultivation while the porridge simmered. The energy in my dantian had grown from something like rough rope to something closer to a living vine. Firm, flexible, full of life. The second cultivation level felt close now, just a thin barrier away. Then I tried something I had been building toward for days. I focused my awareness on a fallen maple leaf a few feet away. Just one leaf. It trembled. Then, slowly, unsteadily, it lifted off the ground, 1 inch, maybe 2, and drifted awkwardly toward my open palm. I held it suspended there for 5 breaths before my spirit sense started aching and my energy drained noticeably. The leaf dropped back to the dirt. I sat very still for a moment, moving objects with thought alone. The very beginning of it, clumsy and exhausting and barely functional, but real. This was the threshold ability that marked the approach to the second cultivation level. A step into something that separated cultivators from ordinary people in a fundamental way. I ate breakfast slowly, feeling the spirit grain's warmth settle through my body, and then walked down to the village for the small market day. I was greeted before I reached the main path. Farmers, women at their stalls, men with their livestock. Nearly everyone I passed called out or nodded or stopped what they were doing. The crowd parted naturally as I walked through. I went straight to the blacksmith shed on the west side of the village. The smith, Zhao Wu, was a broad, powerful man with arms like oak roots and a face permanently dark from years of forged smoke. He looked up when I called his name and broke into a genuine warm smile immediately. I sat down and told him plainly what I needed. The rocky ground on a sunlit slope near my valley was too hard for my current tools. I wanted proper farming implements. A few pieces of iron stock would be useful too, for repairs and general needs. I also mentioned the damp in my storage area was causing problems. Zhao Wu smacked his knee with enthusiasm. Drug herb fields needed properly broken soil. He agreed completely. He started calling out orders to his apprentice immediately. Bring the good iron ingots from under the water trough. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small cloth bundle. A few wolf fangs from the silver wolf king, long and curved, smooth as ivory but harder than ordinary bone. I had kept them knowing they would be worth something to the right person. I added a handful of copper coins and told him to work out the fair value himself. Zhao Wu picked up a fong and his eyes sharpened immediately. He dragged it across the edge of his anvil. It left a clear mark in the iron, harder than pig iron by a noticeable margin. He asked with open admiration where I had found them. I told Zhao Wu the fangs were just something I had picked up and kept it vague. He pushed every coin I offered back to me without hesitation. He said his shop would have been rubble if not for me, and that helping me build a proper herb garden was the least he could do. He loaded me up, a heavy iron ingot, 2 worn but solid iron hose, 2 old pickaxes with good steel still in them, and a small bag of scrap iron offcuts. Half gift, half trade, all given with genuine warmth. I had barely set the tools down back at my valley when voices came up the path. The village elder arrived with old Zhang the hunt master, and 4 young men behind them carrying timber, roof boards, rope, and tools. Zhang Yong was in front, shouldering the heaviest log, face red from the effort. He announced that they had heard I needed a proper storage shed and that the village elder had sent them to build it. I hadn't asked for any of this. The elder stepped forward and made it simple. I had saved everyone. Building a small shed was the village's business now. He pointed his pipe and told the young men to get started. I showed them the spot, a sheltered slope beside my cabin, backed by the cliff wall and facing the sun. They set to work immediately, rolling up sleeves, grabbing the new tools, driving into the ground with pickaxes to set the foundation posts. For strong men moving with the focused energy of people who genuinely want to repay something. It was fast and purposeful. While they worked, I transplanted a few real medicinal plants from my space into a small patch of turned ground nearby. Thick-leafed herbs with strong root systems, mixed in with ordinary plants to look natural. The beginnings of a visible herb garden, something that explained my regular harvests to anyone who might wonder. Jinling perched on top of the first post and watched the whole operation with what looked like mild suspicion about humans building structures on its territory. By the time the sun touched the treetops, the shed was done. Solid timber frame, thick bark roof pinned down tight with long bamboo nails, gaps sealed with pine resin Zhang the Elder had brought. 3 walls closed with heavy planks, a proper door fixed with a wooden bar, floor layered with pine needles and crushed stone for drainage. Zhang Yong and the others wiped their foreheads and asked if it needed anything else. I looked at the sturdy shed, the small green herb patch, the handful of wild persimmon and sour jujube saplings they had also planted in newly dug holes along the slope, and felt the weight of all of it settle in my chest in a way that was entirely good. I brought out a large basin of rice cooked with a small amount of spirit grain crumbled through it, and several pieces of salted wild boar jerky. Not luxurious, but in a village where oil and salt were scarce, it was a real meal. The young men accepted it happily and ate with the appetite of people who had worked hard. I watched them and looked around at what had changed. The cabin wrapped in fresh birch bark, the new strong shed, the herb patch, the saplings taking root. None of this had come from cleverness alone. It had come from being worth something to the people around me, and from choosing to be worth something. I said it quietly to myself as the mountain wind moved through. This is how you last. That evening in the new shed, I filtered the second fermentation spirit grain wine through several layers of clean cloth. The cloudy sediment stayed behind. What dripped through was clear amber liquid, faintly golden, clean, and beautiful. I divided it into small clay jars, added a thread of wild honey to each one, sealed them tight with oiled bamboo paper and rope, and moved them into the quietest corner of the space to continue aging. Then I poured what remained, a small cup of the unfiltered original, and drank it slowly by firelight. The harshness from the first batch was gone. In its place was a deep, warm sweetness that spread through my body gradually, finding its way into every meridian without force. The spirit energy in it was gentler now, easier to absorb, flowing naturally into my long spring cultivation without any guidance needed. The faint mental fatigue from the day's work dissolved quietly. I sat with the empty cup and thought about what this wine might mean beyond my own use. For a cultivator at my level, it was a minor supplement. But for wealthy merchants, aging fighters, or anyone desperate for health and longevity in a city like Linchuan, it would seem like something priceless. A life-extending tonic. The kind of thing people paid fortunes for. Not yet. Far too dangerous to show anyone. But someday, perhaps, a very carefully placed bargaining piece. I set the cup down. The sealed jars waited in the space's quiet corner, aging slowly in that stable, timeless environment. Then I took out the eagle's feather. The faint blue-green light in it was still there, and when I held it and quieted my mind, I could feel a direction, a pull towards something deeper in the mountains. It had been there since the eagle left it. Patient, not urgent, just pointing. My roots here were solid now. The space was producing well. My cultivation was approaching the peak of the first level. The restlessness of someone who had been surviving was starting to give way to the restlessness of someone ready to explore. I told myself quietly, outer edges only. Careful at every step. I was not reckless. The next morning before the dew had cleared, I followed the feather's guidance into the old forest beyond my usual range. Ancient trees with roots like walls, canopy blocking most of the light, ground thick with wet moss and rotting leaves. Completely still except for occasional birdsong. I moved quietly, stepping only on roots and stone, keeping my spirit sense spread out ahead of me to detect snakes, traps, hidden dangers. The feather in my sleeve hummed faintly whenever I drifted off course and steadied when I was going the right direction. After half an hour, the terrain steepened. A narrow valley opened ahead, mostly sealed by fallen ancient trees and thick tangled vines. A stream crashed through the rocks below. The only way forward was a narrow gap in the cliff wall to one side. And just outside that gap, at the edge of the wet mud, a cluster of unusual plants caught my eye. Just outside the narrow gap in the cliff wall, a small cluster of unusual plants grew in the wet mud. Thin, almost transparent green stems. Heart-shaped leaves covered in a dense layer of tiny crystals, like frost that had become part of the leaf itself. In the faint light filtering through the canopy, those crystals scattered pale blue sparks. A faint cold clean energy drifted from them. I stopped and didn't approach immediately. I extended a thread of spirit sense toward the nearest leaf. A sharp, cold sting pierced straight into my awareness. But mixed into that sting was something clean and clarifying, like the feeling of cold mountain air cutting through fog. Nothing else like this grew anywhere nearby. The soil under the rotting leaves was dark and cold-smelling. This plant was growing exactly where it belonged. I named it frost mist grass for myself. I took out my small iron spade and carefully dug up the whole cluster, keeping as much of the cold, dark soil around the roots as I could, and wrapped it in cloth before tucking it into my moss-lined bamboo carrier. Then something in the stream caught my eye. A few dark stones, different from the ordinary gray river rocks. Black, with tiny silver-white flecks scattered across the surface, like fragments of stars pressed into dark glass. I waded in and picked up several of the densest ones. They were startlingly heavy for their size, cold and smooth, with a faint metallic texture when I ran my thumb across them. When I focused my awareness into them, I felt something, a compressed hardness and sharpness, like iron and steel concentrated into mineral form. Star pattern iron. I had heard the name mentioned once in passing by the blacksmith. Rare even in the ordinary world, and according to vague memories of cultivation knowledge, a useful material for crafting basic tools and weapons at higher levels. Whether my guess was right or not, these were not ordinary stones. I added several of the best ones to the carrier beside the frost mist grass and turned toward the narrow canyon entrance to explore further. Then a sound split the sky above the valley. An eagle cry, but nothing like the blue-gray eagle that had visited me. This was enormous and furious and carried a crushing pressure that hit my spirit sense like a physical blow. My mind rang. My whole body staggered. Blood rushed to my head. I didn't think. I just moved, straight back, out of the narrow valley, pressing my spine against the trunk of a massive old tree, knife out, every muscle locked tight, awareness pulled back to the smallest possible core. The killing intent circling above that canyon entrance was unlike anything I had encountered. The Wolf King had been frightening. This was something of a completely different scale. I waited without moving for a full incense stick's worth of time. Eventually, the pressure faded and drifted away into the deep mountains. My shirt was soaked through with cold sweat. I looked once more at the sealed canyon entrance and turned away. The blue eagle's feather pointed here, which meant this place held real things worth finding. The frost mist grass and the star pattern iron were proof of that. But whatever lived in that canyon was far beyond what I could face at my current level. I walked back through the forest, my steps steady and unhurried. Back at the space, I prepared a small separate section of living soil near the spirit spring, the best ground I had, and transplanted the frost mist grass into it carefully. As I was examining the last plant, Jinling dropped from above and landed nearby, neck stretched forward, tiny eyes fixed on the ice crystal leaves with pure curiosity. It reached toward one leaf with its beak, then pulled back from the cold. Forward again. Back again. I reached out and gently touched its head, letting it feel my own sense of the plant's cold energy through our connection. Then I described what I wanted, the smell of it, the cold, dark soil it grew in, what the crystals looked like. Find more of these when you fly, I told it. Remember this one. Jinling looked at the plant, looked at me, then gave one bright sharp call and flew up to circle the field twice before landing on the shed's corner post to preen its feathers. I was fairly sure it had understood. Zhao Lizi came up the path with his usual report, village gossip, a fight over stolen eggs, a traveling merchant back in town with good salt and colored cloth. I listened, gave him a strip of dried rabbit meat and 2 copper coins, and sent him down to get half a pound of fresh pressed oil from the market. He disappeared at a run, happy as always with the arrangement. That night I sat in the new shed with a cup of the aged spirit grain wine, a small dish of pickled mustard greens from my space garden, and Jinling asleep in a wooden slot I had fixed to the overhead beam, puffed up like a small gold ball, faintly snoring. The wine was better than the first batch, smooth going in, then a deep rolling warmth that spread through every meridian without effort. The spirit energy in it flowed easily into my cultivation, clearing the faint mental fatigue that had been building. The shed was warm and smelled of pine and wood, and the soft glow of the torch made everything feel genuinely peaceful. Then I tried again. I settled into cultivation and drove the energy in my dantian at the barrier between the first and second level. The stream of power there was strong now, as thick as a finger, steady and warm. The spirit grain had built it well. I hit the barrier. It held. Again. It held. Again and again, each strike sending a dull resonance through my bones. The energy bounced back. The barrier didn't move. I opened my eyes. Nearly half my remaining spirit grain supply sat beside me, already consumed in tonight's attempt. That was months of harvests, and the wall hadn't shifted by a single hair. I picked up the old animal hide cultivation scroll and read through it for what felt like the 1,000th time. 3 main meridian pathways, 11 branch points, a few sparse lines about condensing energy at the core, and then nothing. The hide was torn cleanly across, the rest missing. Everything about how to break through to the second level, how to open the key energy gates, how to advance past the foundation stage, all of it gone. This was the real problem. Not effort, not spirit grain, not cultivation time. The manual was incomplete. Without the method to actually break through the barrier, I could pour spirit energy into my dantian forever, and it would just sit there, filling a container with no outlet. Like water endlessly poured into a sealed jar. The cold feeling that settled into my spine was different from fear. It was clarity, a very uncomfortable kind. If I exhausted my remaining spirit grain and still couldn't break through, I would be stuck here indefinitely. The path forward was sealed not by weakness, but by missing knowledge. There was only one conclusion. I needed the rest of this cultivation method, or a different one entirely. Old Chun had mentioned a larger town further out, Qingyan Town. A real market. More people. Possibly books, traveling merchants, people who dealt in unusual goods. I held the torn hide scroll in my hands and felt the urgency settle into something harder and more determined than panic. I had to go to Qingyan Town. I brought Old Chun a good bundle of 7-leaf grass and asked him carefully, keeping my voice casual. Did he know of any place nearby where a person might find old books or someone knowledgeable about cultivation methods? I framed it as a family tradition I was trying to piece together, some breathing exercises with a gap in them I couldn't work past. Old Chun set down his pipe and looked at me for a moment. Then he leaned forward and lowered his voice. He told me about Qingyan Town, about 100 li north over several mountain ridges. A major trading hub for mountain goods, furs, and herbs, sitting on the road south toward the larger cities. All kinds of people passed through. More importantly, he said, actual cultivators stopped there. Low-level ones, but real. And on the 5th and 20th of each month, in the abandoned Old Street district near Laohui Slope on the west end of town, a ghost market appeared after midnight and dissolved before dawn. Everything imaginable showed up there. Old jade slips, torn hide scrolls, strange stones and roots, broken pieces of tools and instruments. No guarantees of anything being genuine. He leaned even closer. Stay away from cultivators, he said. Even the low-level ones could end your life without effort. Especially the young solitary ones with no visible sect markings. Those were the most unpredictable and the most dangerous. I thanked him sincerely and left with a clear destination in mind. I prepared carefully. I changed into Zhao Lizi's old faded clothes, rubbed ash and dirt into my face and hands to look like someone who had spent years outdoors doing hard work. I pulled my cultivation energy deep into my dantian and suppressed every trace of it, leaving only the calm, steady bearing of someone who had practiced ordinary martial arts for years. Nothing that would draw attention from anyone sensitive to spirit energy. I packed light. 3 bundles of ordinary grade 7-leaf grass for trade. Nothing good enough to cause curiosity. 5 pieces of star pattern iron to test for value. A small bag of copper coins, hidden in a cloth pouch at my waist. A few wooden splints coated in numbing toxin, and a packet of the spice powder and beast repellent mix I had used before. I sent Jean Ling up high. Too high to be visible, to circle and watch from above as I approached the town. I asked a few villagers who had been to Qingyan Town before, including Zhao Lizi, who had once witnessed a cultivator doing something spectacular there, about the layout, the inns, and most importantly, the rules about how ordinary people were expected to behave around cultivators. Never stare. Never crowd them. Step aside immediately. Never speak to one unless spoken to first. I memorized all of it. Qingyan Town announced itself before I could see it. The sound of cart wheels, horses, shouting merchants, and the dense noise of a real market reached me while I was still several hundred steps away. When the town came into view, I stopped for a moment. Brick and stone buildings packed tightly together. Wooden shop signs hanging from the eaves along every street. Crowds moving in every direction. Mountain traders with heavy loads. Street vendors shouting from their stalls. Carts trying to push through gaps too narrow for them. The smell of fresh bread and meat broth and cheap spices and animals all mixed together into something overwhelming and alive. And then, buried in all of that noise and smell, my dantian gave the faintest pulse of recognition. Somewhere in this town, a thread of cold, clean spirit energy moved through the air, barely detectable, like a single drop of clear water falling through mud. A cultivator was nearby. I spotted the cultivator before he reached me, a young man in a gray-blue sect robe with a flame emblem on the sleeve, walking through the crowd with the kind of absolute indifference that comes from knowing nothing around you can touch you. Everyone near him automatically looked down and stepped aside. The street went quiet for a few seconds after he passed. I filed away everything I observed. Sect disciples wore robes with markings. Lone cultivators dressed however they liked and were harder to read. Everyone, cultivator or not, operated on a strict hierarchy here, and ordinary people at the bottom stayed invisible to survive. I kept moving toward the old district on the west side of town where the ghost market would appear that night. The streets narrowed. The light faded. The smell changed to damp stone and rot. Then 3 figures stepped out of the shadows at the alley corner ahead. The one in front wore a dirty, loose blue robe, hair greasy and pulled back, face yellow-gray and calculating. His 2 companions were big, ordinary-looking hired muscle, no spirit energy, just bulk and menace. They spread out to block my path. The robe-wearer ran his eyes over my bundle and told me in a smooth, oily voice that there was a toll for entering the ghost market. 1 spirit stone, or equivalent value in materials. He made it sound generous. I assessed him instantly through my spirit sense, 2nd level of chi cultivation. Higher than me. His energy was loose and impure, not well cultivated, but the gap was real. I let my face go frightened, hunched my shoulders, let my voice shake. I opened my bundle and showed him 3 bundles of ordinary 7-leaf grass and several pieces of star pattern iron, telling him this was everything I had, just a poor herb collector trying to sell a few things. He looked at the iron with contempt, called it worthless junk, and announced my herbs would cover half the fee. He demanded spirit stones for the rest. Then his energy surged forward, a rough pressure meant to disorient and frighten. And while that pressure was meant to keep my attention on my face and chest, his dirty hand snaked quietly toward my coin pouch at my waist. The 2 hired men moved in from both sides simultaneously, arms reaching for my ribs. They weren't collecting a fee. They were planning to take everything. The cold focus that had been waiting behind my frightened act snapped into place. My right hand moved faster than ordinary human sight, not toward my coin pouch, but into my sleeve, and I crushed a prepared oil paper packet between my fingers as I pulled it free. It burst open in front of his face. A thick cloud of gray-white powder exploded outward, ground from 100 times concentrated spice grass mixed with processed wolf dung, designed to drive away predators. I had used a version of this powder twice before. This one was considerably stronger. The powder cloud hit him directly in the face. He couldn't breathe, couldn't see, couldn't hold his spirit pressure together. It collapsed immediately. I moved before he finished his first cough. I twisted left, let the big man's fist pass close enough to brush my clothes, and pulled my knife from behind my back in the same motion. Oh, the concentrated spirit energy from my dantian. Everything I had built through months of cultivation and spirit grain flowed into my arm and into the blade. The knife edge hummed faintly with a cold light that didn't quite show through the ordinary iron. 1 precise upward slash. Not at him, at the storage pouch hanging from his belt. The cord snapped. The pouch came free into my hand. He screamed when he felt it go, then panicked and threw a fire technique blindly in my direction. A rough, fist-sized fireball, low quality, produced by someone whose vision was mostly gone and whose focus was in pieces. But at this range, even a sloppy attack was dangerous. My spirit sense caught the gathering of his energy before his arm even moved. Jean Ling's awareness flashed through our connection simultaneously, left side, lower ribs. I was already moving. I twisted right by half a body width, fast and loose as a willow branch. The fireball grazed my left side. A patch of cloth the size of my palm burned away instantly. The skin underneath stung with real heat. I didn't stop. I used the left man's incoming fist to redirect my momentum, planted my right foot with cultivation energy behind it, and drove it into the chest of the right side man who had moved too far forward. The impact sent him into the wall hard. He slid down it and didn't get back up. I landed in a low stance, knife tipped down, and looked at Wu Air through the still drifting powder cloud. He was blinking through swollen red eyes, clutching where his pouch had been, unable to speak. I released the spirit energy I had been compressing, every bit of the first cultivation level's peak, refined and dense from months of spirit grain work, pushing outward in a single focused wave. Not wild, controlled, cold. I said quietly that the path of cultivation was long and life was worth more than a fight in an alley. The pouch was payment for his survival today. Come after me again, and the outcome would be different. The look in his eyes when they finally focused on mine told me the message had landed. Not the words, the absolute absence of fear or hesitation in my face. That was what stopped him. I dropped low and moved. Through the gap created by the fallen man, into the narrow side alley packed with broken baskets and old barrels. Jinling's view from above guided me through several quick turns. By the time Wu Air's coughing slowed enough for him to think clearly, I was gone. I made my way through the maze of back alleys, guided by Jinling's view from above, until I reached the ghost market. It was a ruined old district, half-collapsed walls, rotting beams, ground pitted with puddles of dark rainwater. What little light existed came from oil lamps, pine torches, and a few strange glowing insect lanterns. Most sellers kept their faces covered. The air smelled of damp earth, old mold, cheap oil, and something faintly like dried blood. I worked through the stalls methodically, using my spirit sense to test everything that looked remotely useful. Disappointment after disappointment. An old paper scroll that felt completely dead inside. Nothing, just aged paper with convincing-looking writing. A metal fragment with carved symbols that carried not a single trace of spirit energy. Something being sold as thousand-year blood jade that smelled like dog blood mixed with mud. Nearly everything was fake. Clever fakes, some of them, but empty. I was about to leave when a stall in the far corner caught my attention. The seller was a hunched old man under a wide battered hat pulled so low I could only see his white bearded chin. No lamp. No interesting display. Just a faded black cloth on a piece of rotting wood, with a few small things scattered on it. A handful of dry shriveled vine seeds. A small paper packet of tiny wrinkled berries. A worn brass pipe bowl. And in the corner of the cloth, a few pieces of moss. Not ordinary moss. These fragments were nearly dead, edges curled brown-green, barely any color left. But in the very center of each piece, an almost invisible flicker of blue-green light pulsed faintly, then disappeared, then pulsed again. No spirit energy leaking outward at all, just that tiny internal glow, barely alive. I recognized it. It looked almost exactly like the moss growing at the bottom of my spirit spring. The same shape, the same kind of quiet internal light. I crouched and pretended to examine the vine seeds. The old man said 3 copper coins for the seeds without looking up. I pointed to the berry packet. 1 copper, he said. Sour and unpleasant, barely worth picking up. I touched the moss pieces casually. He said he had scraped them off a roadside rock. Nearly dead, had a strange light. Take them for free if I wanted. I counted out 3 coins and pointed to both the berries and the moss together. The hat dipped slightly. I gathered them quickly and moved on. A few stalls down, a chubby, fast-talking seller was waving a handful of grain and claiming it was spirit field rice, jade marrow wheat, he called it, from seeds his ancestors had gathered near a true cultivation field. Most people scoffed. A few bought out of curiosity. I pushed through and tested the grains carefully with my spirit sense. The energy in them was almost non-existent, barely more than ordinary roadside weeds. But the shape of the grains, long and faintly coated with something pale and waxy, did resemble an illustration I had once seen in a text describing the lowest grade of degraded spirit grain varieties. I made a quick decision. Even the worst seed, placed in my space with spirit spring water, might still hold some possibility. I bought a small handful with a few copper coins, keeping my expression casually uninterested. I also found a small medicine hoa at a tool stall, ordinary iron, but the blade was ground unusually well and the handle fitted perfectly. I bought it at the lowest price the seller would accept. As I moved toward the exit, fragments of a nearby conversation drifted to me through the dark. One voice mentioned a place called Blackwind Cave near Mengniu Ridge northwest of Qingyun Town, apparently controlled by a gang called Black River who demanded tribute for anyone wanting to collect herbs or minerals inside. Another voice said the only way to get real high-level cultivation techniques was to join a major sect like Qingluan Sect or Shuangguang Valley, or spend a fortune at a shop in the prefectural city called Wanfa Pavilion, which apparently sold various cultivation methods at prices that could buy half a street in Qingyun Town. Wanfa Pavilion. Major sections. Blackwind Cave. I filed all of it away and slipped out of the ghost market into the dark. When I finally reached my valley path and felt the mountain air replace the town smell, I let out a long breath. I checked the burn on my side. A patch of red swollen skin the size of my palm, painful to touch. I cleaned it carefully but left it uncovered on purpose. A reminder to keep. I sat and replayed the fight in my mind the way I would review a close game. Wu Air had a higher cultivation level but terrible fundamentals. Loose impure energy, a badly practiced fire technique, sloppy aim. He relied entirely on the pressure of his higher level to frighten people. Without my solid foundation, my spirit sense warning, my prepared powder, and the crucial advantage of appearing weak first, I might have been seriously hurt or killed. The city was 100 times more dangerous than the village. No rules. No community. Only strength and cunning. Back at the space, I took out the fragments of glowing moss from the ghost market. Nearly dead, edges dried and curled, but that tiny blue-green light in the center still flickering. I pressed them gently into the wet soil beside the Spirit Spring's existing moss colony, at the moistest edge, where the spring mist settled thickest. No immediate visible change. But my spirit sense caught something. A faint resonance beginning between the new moss fragments and the established colony. Like two instruments finding the same note. The spring's existing moss seemed slightly more stable afterward. The mist above it fractionally cleaner and more active. I had found something real at the ghost market after all. I planted the so-called jade marrow wheat seeds in the most barren corner of the space. Poor soil, just the faintest trace of spring mist reaching it. No special treatment. A pure experiment. Could even these weak, degraded seeds produce anything in the space environment? Then I barred the cabin door, sealed the window cracks with wet clay, and sat down with Wu Air's stolen storage pouch. It was small and rough, clearly cheap. When I sent my spirit sense inside, it felt exactly as expected. A tiny space, almost empty, a few hard biscuit crumbs, the smell of cheap tobacco. Completely worthless. But something made me go around again. More carefully this time. I let my long spring cultivation energy flow out as the gentlest possible touch and traced every centimeter of the inner surface one more time. Near the bottom corner, my awareness hesitated. Not a formation blocking anything. More like a slight unevenness. Two layers of fabric that should be seamless but weren't quite. A nearly invisible gap where spirit energy naturally flowed around rather than through. A physical hidden pocket. My heartbeat skipped. I turned the bag inside out, found the slightly thicker section at the bottom edge, and used the tip of my poison-coated wooden spike with careful controlled pressure to separate the hidden stitching. Not cutting, just opening old seam lines. The fabric parted with a faint sound. Two small objects fell out onto the grass mat. Two things had fallen out of the hidden pocket. The first was several small gray stones, each about the size of a fingernail, dull and unremarkable. But when I touched them and sent my spirit sense in, clean concentrated energy surged back immediately. Pure, dense, alive. Spirit stones. 3 of them. My first spirit stones ever, taken from someone who had tried to rob me. The second was a small booklet, palm-sized, bound in tanned animal hide, worn at the edges. And beside it, a crumpled piece of leather with a crude hand-drawn map. I opened the booklet. The title read, Grass and Wood Minor Arts. Below it, a note in small characters. 12 beginner-level spirit control techniques for helping spirit plants grow and directing plant energy. The joy that hit me was almost physical. I had to breathe slowly to keep from making noise. I looked at the map. A rough outline of mountain terrain. A crooked line running deep into it, ending at a mark shaped like a claw with 3 characters written beside it. Blackwind Cave. A small cross marked somewhere nearby. Crude and simple, like a quick personal reminder. So the man I had fought wasn't just a low-level bully collecting tolls. He was a wandering cultivator who had hidden his real valuables in a physical pocket inside a storage pouch. A classic trick for someone who expected to be robbed. And I had accidentally robbed him. I opened the booklet properly inside my space and started reading. The first technique was basic object control, how to shape spirit sense into several focused threads, like extending invisible fingers, and use a specific vibration frequency to lift and move physical objects. It was far more precise and efficient than the clumsy, pulling motion I had been practicing on my own. The diagrams were clear. The instructions were specific. I tried it immediately. Shaped my spirit sense into 3 condensed threads, sent them toward a small stone a few steps away, and pulled upward. The stone lifted, 3 inches off the ground, wobbling but steady, the weight of it feeding back through the threads into my awareness. Nowhere near graceful, but the energy cost was noticeably lower than my old method. I practiced until I could move the stone several feet and set it down without dropping it. Then I turned to the second technique, basic cloud rain art, drawing moisture from the air, condensing it above the palm, releasing it as fine rain. I formed the hand seal, clumsy at first, and directed my spirit energy through the lung meridian pathway as the technique described, reached outward to the water vapor floating through the space. A small gray-white cloud formed above my palm, barely a foot across, slowly rotating, dense with moisture. I told it to fall. Soft rain pattered down onto the spirit grain seedlings below. The leaves spread open visibly, catching each drop, their veins brightening with the absorbed moisture. This was what farming with cultivation should look like. Not hauling water manually. Not rationing every drop of spirit spring by hand. A proper technique that called rain from the air and put it exactly where I needed it. I skimmed the remaining techniques quickly, ground listening, which sent awareness into the earth to detect nearby movement, and vine growth art, which needed specific seed varieties I didn't currently have. Ground listening was clear in principle, but too advanced for me yet. Vine growth would wait. I closed the booklet and held it against my chest for a moment. Object control and cloud rain alone were worth more to me right now than any expensive cultivation manual. Practical, immediate, directly useful for everything I was building. The hidden pocket had been the real treasure, and I had only found it because I refused to accept that something was entirely worthless. Once the excitement settled, I turned to practical thinking. I needed to know what I had available for trading before going back to the ghost market. I pulled everything of potential value out of the space and laid it on the flat rock by the spring. Spirit grain, the most recent harvest, golden and full. I set aside most of it for my own cultivation and packed 2 pounds in a small hemp bag for trading. Real spirit grain, not ordinary food. Anyone who knew what they were looking at would recognize it immediately. 7-leaf grass, growing beautifully in the living soil, the leaves showing a faint glow now, cool energy moving through the veins. I selected the 10 best plants, wrapped their roots in damp moss, and stored them in a sealed bamboo tube. The ghost market had already shown me these caught the attention of people who knew herbs. Star pattern iron, 5 fist-sized pieces of the dense black stone with silver flecks, gathered from the mountain stream. Still uncertain of their exact value, but clearly unusual. Spirit grain wine, 1 small black clay jar, sealed with mud, the smell of it seeping through the clay anyway. The wine had clarified from cloudy to a clean pale gold, and the spirit energy inside it was gentler and more concentrated than raw grain. About 1 pound. My strongest trading piece. I would only bring it out at the right moment. And the 3 spirit stones from Wu Air's hidden pocket. I set those aside entirely. Not for trading. Emergency reserve only. My goal for the next ghost market visit was clear. Any fragment of information or technique related to long spring cultivation's later stages. Any wood or earth energy method. Any hint about what came after the foundation level. That afternoon, I called Zhao Lizi up to the valley. He stood 3 steps away with his usual mix of nervous energy and visible excitement, already knowing I was not an ordinary person. I told him I had a job for him. He nodded so fast his head nearly came loose. Pack some worn clothes and travel food, I said, and take this bag of copper coins. Go to Qingyan town and stay a while. Get comfortable there. Then gather information on 4 things. First, Where do cultivators prefer to eat and drink in town? Listen to their conversations, especially any talk about cultivation methods, breakthroughs, or unusual experiences. Remember everything and report it back to me word for word. Second, find out who controls Black Wind Cave. Is it really the Black River Gang? Who has been inside? How many people have died there? What makes it dangerous? Don't go near it yourself. Ask around the edges, indirect questions only. Third, keep watch for a thin, tall cultivator named Wu. If you spot him, note where he goes and who he talks to. Observe from a distance only. Do not let him see you. Fourth, learn the ghost market's layout, its unwritten rules, and which people there are genuinely dangerous. Zhao Lizi tucked everything securely inside his clothes with the excitement of someone who had just been given a purpose he was perfectly suited for. He said information gathering was his family's oldest skill and vanished down the valley path.